I honestly cannot tell if it's launched. Okay, there it goes.
Apparently, we're actually live this time. It's not the first time us trying to go live this time. I've had connection issues, by the way, popping up on the top of my screen. So if I disappear, it has literally nothing to do with me. It's just dodgy connection, apparently. But hello, everyone. I hope you can hear us.
Yeah, hopefully it won't have little issues. Okay, Twitch looks good. That's always nice. And hopefully YouTube will be good. I guess we'll find out here in a minute. But yeah, this hopefully everyone's having a good week. We are, of course, post July 4th for my fellow Americans, which a little bit of a weird holiday nowadays, but you know, it's good time to spend time with family and begrudgingly look out at your neighbors who are trying to blow themselves up and just shaking your head in vague disappointment. But you know, that's just life.
Yeah, let's try to avoid the politics of America just now because we are both likely to go off in one. So, yeah, we don't need that because today we are discussing something significantly less explosive, which is Warhammer's Araby.
Yeah, today's going to be a very, very interesting one for a lot of reasons. Araby has a genuinely fascinating history, which of course we'll get into within the Warhammer space. This is probably going to be one of the most overt examples where you're going to, for those of you that may be like new to Warhammer especially, you're going to really get to see Warhammer's kind of foundation as oh, you know those historical random minis you have? Well, you can use them in this new fantasy setting of ours. And then it very slowly started to evolve into something else. Very slowly, and then very fast all at once. And then it stopped. It's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, Araby is a particularly fascinating place because it's somewhere that pretty much every Warhammer writer at one point or another has made at least an allusion to or referenced or discussed in one of their books, but itself has never really had much of a proper army in Warhammer. But as we'll discuss when we dive into the army list, the introduction, it has had an army in Warhammer for all that a lot of people don't think it has, but we'll be discussing that when we dive into the actual intro.
Yeah, Araby, not to be topical, especially for those of us who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s when this was a prevalent fear because it was used in so many movies, but it's kind of like a patch of Hollywood quicksand where you land in it and you think, oh, it's not that deep, and then it just keeps going and going and going, and you're like, oh no.
Yeah, the old shifting sands of Araby is a pretty good metaphor for Araby as a whole in Warhammer because it's one of those ones where you go, well, there can't be that much lore about it. You know, a little bit like Estalia. There's not much about that, but the more you look into it, you go, oh, crap. There's not just a lot. There's an awful lot. And I do mean a great deal of material. And a lot of it is old. A lot of it's almost certainly out of date, but a lot of it isn't. So it makes for a fascinating place to look into.
Yeah. Real quick, I do want to thank very much. Oh, geez. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. Tech, thank you for the 27 months. Are you in the desert winds now? Thankfully, no.
Gosh.
Yeah. Well, then Dynamite for 35 months, almost 3 years. Thank you very much. That is a long time of support. There will be some fun little kind of announcement things towards the end of the stream. We've got some things coming up. We're going to be experimenting with some new type of Lorebeard soon, where we're going to be doing some off days and having some different kinds of guests on, which should be super duper fun. You're going to see people you've not had the chance to before. And it should be a really, really good time. Kind of like almost including like kind of a new generation of writers, which is very exciting because we love getting people on and seeing what's taken in their heads. But yeah, Araby should be a very good time. Obviously, there are parts of this that we will probably get into what some folks might consider some slightly controversial topics, but you know, Lorebeards isn't new to that. So we will, you know, strap on our protective gear and wade into it.
And he'd say, if such matters concern you, don't watch our Frimmer stream. Yeah,
really.
There is quite a lot to discuss in this one. I'm kind of looking forward to it because Araby has been a fun topic that I think Games Workshop has yet to turn its eye to properly, and it's about time that it did.
Yeah, especially with the old world stuff. Sticks and Stone, thank you for becoming a member of the Red House. We really appreciate that. All right, let's go ahead and hop into pre-stream super chats, and then we'll get into it.
Sounds good to me.
We'll start going. Scott Thane, good morning, Sultans, Emirs, and Sheiks. Excited to talk about Araby elementalism today. Yeah, I hard agree. Especially, man, Araby would be so good for the old world setting.
Yeah, it would.
I really hope we go down there because they would be one of the best places to explore 200 years ago. Especially because, but Araby's, we'll get into it when we're talking about kind of like timeline stuff, because we're going to try and talk about as much as we can. I doubt we'll get to everything, but if there's enough interest, we could always do a part 2 later. But Araby has one of those histories that the vast majority of the timeline, we don't know a lot about what's going on there, but when we do know what's going on there, there is like so much info just thrown in your face. And then it'll go quiet for like another 300, 400 years. And we don't have a lot about what's going on there during the Great War. So I really hope that Games Workshop is considering going down there, because elementalism especially should be a very premier feature of Araby. Yep. Up there with like demonology and like certain forms of necromancy. So hopefully they'll be going down there. Donoman, okay. Cathay Yin Yang Pring Sigmar. Okay, so this was brought up in the aftermath of the stream we did on the new Cathay lore from the Arcane Journal, and we're gonna do like a quick hot take on it, and then we have to move on. We can't linger on it. Which is that there's a note that me and Andy just kind of forgot to see, because it's very small, which says that the Cathayans have interpreted the yin-yang symbol to be associated with the twin-tailed comet, which is obviously a big because yin and yang go back to right after the cataclysm, but then they also associate it with twin-tailed comet, which of course doesn't show up for another several thousand years. Now what I will very simply, because like we could probably do a whole stream almost just about the twin-tailed comet, but so I will very simply say that GW has the old world has had some kind of funny takes on the twin-tailed comet as far as like dates and all this other stuff is concerned. They get a little silly and will probably have to be fixed later on because of the silliness, like being like, oh yeah, the comet showed up when Sigmar like formed the empire. It's like, that's not right.
It heralded his birth, unless they're just rewriting it completely.
Yeah. So and now this comes in, and to be fair, the little segment doesn't do a very good job of saying like how exactly this comes about and exactly at what point the Cathayans were like, oh, there's a famous twin-tailed comet that we also associate with yin and yang. So I'll say that from my perspective, it's the idea is cool. I like the twin-tailed comet being kind of like a universal symbol across the setting, because it's supposed to be a really important thing that shows up at a really, dramatic times. So tying Cathay into that, great. Tying it into yin and yang specifically feels a little weird unless there's like a very sudden movement around Sigmar's time, which could be the case. But to me, this kind of makes me think of what Andy was saying when we were talking about that it's a little weird that Cathay was like, oh, look at that Sigmar guy halfway across the world who's so interesting that I'm going to send my daughter over there, which makes no sense. Maybe this kind of could address that later, but to me, it just kind of felt like GW's like, oh, we should throw in a twin-tailed comet reference. And did
it does feel a bit like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just feels like it needs a little bit more justification. I think it's worth noting as well that when you go to the older lore, the yin-yang symbol is also a core symbol of the High Elves. This is now in modern lore sort of forgotten, but it still has its remnants. If you take a look at Azurin, that's the divine creator of all, the king of all gods, so to speak.
Yeah,
his symbol is the yin yang symbol, and he has a bifurcated mask, as in a mask split into two, of black and white with a sinuous line down the middle. He wears a mask with a yin yang symbol on it as a symbol of his divine rule. So the yin yang symbol, which is on a lot of Warhammer Fantasy 4th edition art, you'll find it on quite a lot of their models, because it was right from the very beginning a high elf symbol, and it wasn't until later they said that that symbol came from Azurin. It's something that is a core component of the setting in multiple ways, so there's no reason that it can't be brought up and attached to one thing or another. But if you're looking for its most ancient reference that we have in setting in the lore somewhere, it's actually with the high elves.
Yeah, which is cool and would be lovely to remain canonical, because that just adds another layer of story.
And it keeps everything wrapped together nicely. It's all part of one world, which all works off of a similar cosmology, which all has one root, and that's nice.
Yeah. All right, we have to move on. Nagarash, I'm curious, what do you guys disagree on most? So but the answer to you're not going to like the answer to this. It depends on what day it is. Yeah. Because our opinions, like, they're not ironclad. They change about a lot of things. And, like, we'll have a discussion and, like, might have an opinion, and then we'll get to the end of the discussion and have a very, very different opinion. So
yeah, the Warhammer lore itself is mutable, and we both accept it, which means that disagreements are really rare, because Warhammer lore shifts and moves with the tides of time and the requirements from Games Workshop in a particular era. So because of that, it's very difficult to actually have a thing. I'd say, if anything, it would probably be our taste in food.
Yeah, there you go.
Weak ass.
Totally not a cop-out answer. We're good. Yeah. He didn't specify Warhammer, so that's fair. The Singemeister. Shout out to Frederico de Ramos for uploading loads of Araby lore on the Warhammer wiki. Almost all of it was made up by him, but you know.
And the Singemeister, you're not incorrect in that, not calling out Frederico specifically, but the Warhammer wiki does have quite a lot of interesting takes. And sometimes those takes are clearly the individual slant of the author at hand and not necessarily directly related to any clear source. That being the case, always have your eyes very wide open if you read anything on the Warhammer wikis. Yeah, not saying it's wrong. It's like real Wikipedia. It's great until it's not.
Yeah, the Araby wiki in particular is fun, and there is a lot, because I mean, I will say in prep for this video, I like to leaf through them, because oftentimes they're pretty good about like attaching sources to the end of the things, because then I'll just go look at the sources. And the Araby one makes me laugh in a good way, because they very clearly attempted to, instead of just being like, here's all the stuff from this edition, here's all the stuff from this edition, they just tried to tie it all together as one overarching narrative, which is what we like to do. Now, I do wish that there was more like disclaimers on the page about how this is an interpretation of it, not this is what it is, because it's presented as this is what it is, and that's not the case.
Agreed completely.
But other than that, like, I like it. It just needs disclaimers on it. Mads Christensen, did you guys forget the Light College / Order in Altdorf is boys only in the last tier list in contrast to all the wizards? It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be at all, because that makes zero sense.
And the Light College, I wouldn't mind them knowing the source. I hope that's not the 4th edition book, because if it is, I'm going to cry. Because there's many depictions of light wizards that are female.
I would, if I had to guess, I would guess it's probably the Von Horstmann Black Library novel. But
did it say that? Because if it did, it needs a slap. Yeah, there's lots of. In fact, Mads, if you're still on, can you tell me what the source is? Because I don't recall that source, but I don't recall a lot of sources. But none of the colleges are gender specific, although some of them are definitely gender biased, in that more people seem to demonstrate from one gender or another, or are accepted from one gender or another. But that's very much down to individual interpretations of the lore, and you'll often find that as games make new editions, they just completely ignore material like that. For a long time, the Bright Wizard was largely male, and then look what happened when Warhammer Online came about, and it just became a 50-50 split right down the middle. So it's entirely up to individual interpretations by the different writers, but broadly, that's not the case.
Yep. All right, then we've got Olochud. Nope, all up goo. There we go. In your Winds of Magic rating, you said that only being allowed to learn one win is holding back humans from catching up with the elves in magic. Could this be the reason Teclis organized colleges the way he did? Some people in universe suspect this.
Indeed.
Is that the case?
This is a common this is something that many humans believe. Whether it's the case or not is to be debated. After all, a single human lifespan tends to be pretty short in the old world, and a single human lifespan is not necessarily enough to properly master more than one wind anyway. So,
yeah, I mean, keep in mind that when Teclis showed up and was hanging out with humans for the first time, he was literally witnessing the Great War. So, from his perspective, it might be these guys need bumpers on their bowling, or else things just blow up.
Magic was going mad, everything was going weird, and it's a nice clean way to ensure that the humans do not go wrong. And that is something that is a definite concern, because humans are known for their open susceptibility to corruption.
Yep. Let's see. Muffin Baskets just picked up my Cathay boxes. Oh yeah, it is Cathay release day, isn't it? And more importantly, picked up my copy of Dark Deeds. Woohoo! Yay!
Thank you for buying Dark Deeds. And if you don't know what Dark Deeds is, the links will be, I don't know, probably hopefully in the video description. If not, you can go find it over in my Discord. But yes, you should go buy your own copy of Dark Deeds right now, because holy crap, we need more of those to sell.
Yep, the links are down below, and knowing Hawk, he'll spam them in a second anyway. Necromancer Kobo. Most people know many of the problematic elements of old Warhammer. How would Araby rank when compared to the likes of Pygmies, the old Paymaster model, or the old familiar lore? It's not that bad.
It's really not that bad at all, actually. In the greatest scheme of lore, Araby it's had its moments here or there. And there's a few points where, from the external side of it, it was the Horseman book. There we go. That's the Horseman book is not a great.
It's a Black Library book. What do you do?
And further, for a Black Library book, it also completely rewrote when Horseman's dating was. So I wasn't a fan of it for that either. Cut a long story short, in what we were discussing, I've now forgotten what we were discussing. What was the question? Oh yes.
How bad was Araby?
Yeah, it's broadly fine, with lots of individual examples that just need a quick tweak to be better.
Yeah, Araby. Most of Araby's problems are not actually that big problems. It's more that they were written in like first edition or second or third. Like, we're talking old shit.
And often with some unfortunate name choices.
Yeah, and they just like never got updated. So they're still kind of like what we have to work with outside of Warmaster, which we'll talk about later. So it's not as much like, oh man, it was written so bad nobody talks about it, as no, they really need to talk about it, because it just needs to be brought into the modern setting, and they could smooth it out quite easily. Tradition. Had a chance to look at the new Old World RPG yet? No, I haven't. I have been busy. So I have not had a chance to peek in on it. I intend to, but I haven't had time yet.
So,
Watchdog 3079. Would you say they have genies or Jinn or both?
Yes.
Yeah, the answer is yes. And the newer lore that we've been getting is starting to do some fun things with this. That's opening all kinds of like weird cases, which is a good thing in my opinion. And we'll talk about that. And also why Araby lore needs to like be looked at so it can properly evolve. Dynamite, there's been a lot of discussion on Discord about whether Araby should keep its single god religion. Obviously, it should probably not be called Allah and made very different from IRL Islam, but would you keep their monotheistic religion or make them have multiple gods? So I'll go first, because I think Andy's going to have a much more interesting answer, so I'll get mine out of the way first. Obviously, Allah and that should just be thrown out immediately. That should not be in there, because we're not supposed to this is a very direct, if you go back to like first edition Warhammer and you look at it, there is like basically Muslim stuff and what very much appears to be Christian stuff and all this other stuff just in there, because they were just using models that they had and building a world around it. We'll talk about some of those stories. Some of them have even appeared in games like Total War Warhammer, but the Warhammer devs the Total War devs smoothed it to make it fit into the modern setting, and it was not hard to do. Personally, I don't care for monotheistic religions in the Warhammer world, because they don't tend to make a lot of sense unless you're working with a very, very small focus group, essentially. So you're working with like an individual clan or tribe or village or whatever. I think the closest you should ever get to monotheism in Warhammer is that a particular group has like an overall deity that they value more highly. So like the Lady of the Lake for Bretonia is the closest that I would ever get to monotheism in Warhammer, because that's just not really how the Warhammer world works. And my preference for Araby is the religion that was kicked around by some authors that were attempting to kind of move away from the Allah stuff, which is the three elementals. So you have like it's like God, I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but it's like there's basically an Ifrit, a Jinn, and a nymph. It's like the sea goddess, the I'll look them up while Andy's talking, but it's a trio, and I much prefer the trio because they examine a lot more different aspects of life. And monotheism, it just falls apart very, very quickly based on how humans work in the Warhammer world, especially when you're dealing with Araby, which, as we'll get into, has a very active relationship with spirits and elementals.
Yeah. So for all I'm supposedly going to be saying something much more interesting, and Turnpike, thank you very much. I have a very similar opinion to Sotek, and that's that monotheism and the Warhammer world not only don't really work, it's just not how Warhammer is. If we were using monotheism, why didn't we use that for the equivalent for the Crusades? If we're using monotheism as a thing, surely the old world should have been pulled together underneath one god, and we should be doing that. It's as core to Europe as Islam is to the various Islamic nations. So I see no reason why we should be importing some form of a one god religion just purely because from the outside that looks like the sort of thing we should do. Moving towards a far more pre-Islamic, lots of different deities and spirits and jinn and creatures is just more interesting. There's much more there. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have, for example, a single god that perhaps has become more important, or a triumvirate of gods, or a group of individual deities. All of those work really well. So whether you want to go for, I don't know, your Ifrit and your Jinn and your Nymph or whatever else it might be, that's cool. But I would much rather it had not just depth, but breadth as well, rather than just be one. It's something that I would probably consign to the early editions of Warhammer and leave it there.
Yep. All right. David, Arabian Nights. Yeah, it's a great song. Great song. It's a banger. Bioflow 28. Is Araby a strictly human faction? Should it be? Well, okay, so
it's a largely human faction like the Empire is.
Yes, and should it be? In my opinion, yes. They do have things that reinforce. Yeah. We'll get into like the elementals. They're a very elemental heavy faction.
So Araby should be a big kind of old world nation, which means we should have equivalents to halflings, to elves, to ogres, and indeed we do have all of those mentioned. Dwarves are a core component as well, but much less so than they are over in, say, the Empire. Elves are in most of the major cities of Araby. So the answer is it's a human faction at its core, but it is definitely not only with humans there being legal. So it's all humans being perfect humany. Yeah, that's not a thing.
Yeah. And also I want to put this up. Yeah, Chaos Dwarfs, they're a great example of like a functioning, essentially monotheistic religion in Warhammer.
They are not. That's nonsense. I'm going to call it out straight away. Adrian, they are not monotheists. Okay, they have a god that they have as a patron, but they don't think that that is the only god in the world. They don't think that this is the only god that is worthy of worship anywhere. They're making deals with Chaos in the north all the time, and Chaos Dwarves, if we took them as a full culture, would be fully aware of absolutely everything that exists. They're not monotheists at all, but they do put one god above all others because it's their individual patron who, well, saved their ass.
That's a very good way to put it. All right, who? Sizeman, thank you very much for the 14 months of being a member. Speaking of adapting various Arabic cultures, have any of you seen the Iron Sultanate from Trench Crusade? It might be the best white man adapts non-white culture. I have seen it. It's very exciting for me personally because it is getting rid of a lot of the stigma around it. Because there has been a stigma of people afraid to touch Arabic or Middle Eastern influenced cultures because they're like, oh, well, we can't touch that because that's just a no-go zone. So any opportunity to chip away at that in many ways, self-imposed restriction, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, and I agree completely. The Iron Sultanate's pretty awesome.
Thoughts on potential Chaos Wars at Games Workshop show on the 18th? I'd love to see it. I mean, I'll be there. Andy might even be there. But we'll be watching.
I'm straight,
and we'll see what happens. Hammond, do you know what books have less pages than Araby lore? American history, original British food recipes, and jokes that will make Germans laugh. Thank you, Hammond. Fatir Ku, the interesting thing in Araby is that sand isn't their main material for faction establishment. No lore of sands, no sand-based thingies, etc.
You say that, but they do use sand quite a bit in what very little spells we have. Sand is a core component of some of those. So you're right, while simultaneously the writers have fallen back on that rather tried and tested and somewhat cliched example more than once.
Yeah, it's not as over the top as you would expect Games Workshop to have been with it.
Yeah, quite agreed.
Darius Rose, do average Skaven on the Surface Lord act like Chuck McGill in that scene from Better Call Saul when he has that tinfoil blanket on and goes outside? I haven't seen that scene, so I don't feel qualified to answer that.
I have, and if you've watched any LAWhammer, you'll find a couple of Skaven who act almost exactly like that. When they go outside, and they're like, because they're just used to having something right above their heads all the time.
Yeah, there is a very good staple in Black Library books about Skaven where they always feel like they're going to fall up into the sky. So they really don't like going out there. Nystra, I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating. It gets everywhere. That's why I prefer the air. It do be that. Sean Soltz, does Araby start using black powder at the same time as the Dawi and Cathay, or was it imported by one of those groups? So that's a great question.
Great question.
Araby does have a brutally unexplored but very important history with black powder, because as we'll discuss, one of the things that Araby were like geniuses at by old world standards was alchemy and various forms of science. They had what was very similar in our world, where the Middle East had like its golden age of knowledge and invention, and Araby, because of that, invented a lot of really cool weapons, like the Jezzail. Was supposedly invented by the Arabians or Arabians, depending on how you like to say it. You'll see, like, if you go look at their Warmaster army, they have some very cool black powder weapons. Like their Jezzails were really awesome because it'd be a guy riding on a camel with this giant gun that's like hoisted on the camel humps to stabilize it, which is just very cool. And some of the old Skaven lore talked about how the clan scribe Jezzails were based on the Araby design.
Skaven steel.
Yeah, so there is a history there. There's also not a ton of dwarves super nearby, but there is a very important mountain range where they likely got the materials they needed to make black powder. Unfortunately, this is one of those things that we don't know a lot about Araby's history with black powder. It's very vague.
Yeah, it is. It's almost certainly, if we're going to be as clean as we can be, an import from Cathay. That seems to be the obvious route. Cathay appears to be the most clean starting point for black powder, but Araby as a place and the great cities of Araby significantly predate any of the other human realms other than the Hekara. There is no other older ones up in the old world. They predate Tylos. They predate a lot.
Yeah, they're old.
Araby is old, which means that we had their rise of enlightenment far earlier than the equivalent in the rest of the old world. I mean, it's a far, far, far older place with a great deal more history. So that being the case, it was before all the rest of the old world, but likely not before Cathay.
Yeah, Araby is so old. We'll get into it, but Araby is like so old that the like great fall of their golden age is like 1,200 years before Sigmar's even born.
Yep.
Like they've been around for a hot minute.
Yeah, they have.
Pormisia, other thing weird is assassins should be a main thing among Araby. By the way, change my name, put my social media name. You can spell it easier. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And you are correct that so Warhammer has a Warhammer has.
It's just worth noting. Okay, the land of assassins, quite literally, the land of assassins is in Araby.
True.
Okay, the land of assassins. Go check out the map that you get with White Dwarf 200, and you will find the land of assassins just sitting beside the what they call the Atlan Mountains, or I can't remember what they're called.
Yeah, the Atlan Mountains. Yeah,
yes, the Atlan Mountains, just off towards the side there. It's not too far away from Kofor. So you're right. The assassins should be in there somewhere. As to where, the gods alone know, because Araby never really got its extra detail.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not hard to imagine it at all as well, like people that are experts at moving through the sands undetected because they wear like the proper clothing and they're good at hiding amongst the dunes and stuff. Assassins would probably be very, very, very good in that land. So, yeah.
If you're doing a modern Warhammer army, they'd probably have some assassin troops, much like Skaven assassins and Dark Elf assassins, sitting in amongst their roster.
Yeah, fun fact, there's actually a Skaven clan down in Araby that is in their older lore. It's from Children of the Horned Rat, so 2nd edition Wolfrup. There's a mention of a Skaven clan there that developed their own unique version of that clandestine assassin background, but they're not an offshoot of Clan Eshin. They developed independently of Clan Eshin, which does suggest that Araby has its own unique assassin culture, which it should.
Yeah, quite. It should.
Jonathan Scott, while they were a Turkish thing IRL, Araby seems like the best place to add the Janissaries to there you go, to Warhammer Fantasy Battle. But if we did, where would they be recruited from?
Yeah, Jonathan, Araby is a bit of a mess of amalgamated cultures already. So the answer to this is almost anywhere. Really, a better place to do this would be the Border Princes. It would be a better area to develop this as an idea. And you'll find that the Border Princes often used to have Janissary-like troops rising up from one of the larger cities in the Border Princes. And this is used by more than one writer in the lore. So personally, I'd probably move it to the Border Princes and then just build a better Border Princes than what they've currently done.
Oh, Turnpike. Wow, thank you very much, Turnpike. That's very kind of you.
As I said earlier, very kind. Thank you.
Morning, gents. It's my birthday. Well, happy birthday
to you. Happy birthday. I don't want to get our stream demonetized because
I know somebody owns that for
some reason. Stupid reasons, but yes.
Here's a gift. Any thoughts on an Arabian Everchosen? Easy. Could be done. Not hard at all.
And it's also worth noting that in modern spelling for Arabian, it's with a Y, not an I, just for anyone out there, because in later Warhammer writing, they made a very clear distinction between the real world, Arabian Peninsula and elsewhere, and the Warhammer equivalent. So they used a Y in English to make it as clear as they possibly could, and they pop it everywhere. So drop the Y in if anyone's out there dropping their comments.
That's also why I sound like an idiot when I'm saying Arabian, and it's because I'm trying to make that Y a distinct version of the word instead of just saying Arabian, which will make people think,
it's Arabian. It is, in the same way that we use Nippon, and Nippon is just the actual name for Japan in Japanese. Nihon or Nippon. So this is a thing that Warhammer does. They just make a fantasy equivalent of these things. So there's no need to try and, push yourself into weird extremes, because Warhammer's already broken that rule itself multiple times. It
seems like an Everchosen from Araby would have some unique challenges being so far from the poles and so close to Nehakara. I agree, which would in many ways make it a very fun, unique story. One thing we'll talk about, Araby has a very fun, genuinely history with chaos, of that it has had some individuals produced there who kind of come off like Everchosens, but are not said to be Everchosens, but they could have been, which we'll discuss them as we go. Hannibal, so excited for this. Catch you after F1. I don't know what F1 is, but
Formula One. It's car racing.
Oh, very cool. Well, enjoy your car race.
Enjoy it.
Pormisia, from my historical knowledge for Araby, what exactly Games Workshop can inspire from is the Saba Kingdom, as well as Akkadians and their mythical creatures.
The same thing can be said for this as can be said for almost all real world inspirations, and that's that they can form a part of the threads that you're going to weave into the tapestry of the new thing that you're creating. Warhammer is often at its weakest when it copy pastes. Warhammer is often at its strongest when it takes some real world examples and then dials it up to ridiculous Warhammer beyond 11, because their sound system goes far beyond 11 and makes it something unique, interesting, and tells new stories that are not necessarily derived from the real world. An attempt, for example, to pull out, I'm going to bring up a different comment here. Meanwhile, Prague laughed my ass off, and you're right to do so, because Prague is pretty much Prague in the real world, except it's not. If you take a look at what Prague is in Kislev, it's so far removed from Prague in the real world that they have nothing in common bar sharing a simple name. And that being the case, I would suggest the same should be done for anything they do with Araby.
Yeah, one of the traps that me and Andy, I think, will always drum on that I would encourage y'all to ingrain is it is very, very, very easy with Warhammer to think like, oh, well, if the Empire is the Holy Roman Empire, I should just take everything that existed in the Holy Roman Empire, port it into Warhammer, and I'm done. No, it should be so much more diverse and fascinating than that. And all those things that you're trying to port, you shouldn't port them one-to-one. You should be messing with it to make it dialed up. Araby, the biggest trap of Araby that a lot of people, I think, tend to fall into is I'll see people arguing about like which Middle Eastern culture it should be. And it's like, none of them. It shouldn't be any of them one-to-one at all. It should take inspiration from a bunch of them.
We've got quite a few to go through yet.
Okay, let's fly. And we can always
looking at the time. I haven't done my intro yet.
Yeah, Kurt Kobrak, if you had one choice for Games Workshop to basically overhaul / reinvent the nation like they had for Cathay / Kislev, would you pick Araby? End would be the most important for the overall setting. Araby would be really nice for the old world as it currently stands.
Agreed. And
Downman, to be frank, other people have argued that it could be that they believe all the gods are just interpretations of one god to differentiate them from other human cultures. On a personal level, I'm not especially bothered in a way, just trying to accurately represent what others have said.
Yes, and I think that's a nonsense because it's demonstrably false. It's just not true. It is, however, something that I think could be a core philosophy that is taught by some, but it doesn't feel like it should be something to characterize an entire old world nation when you're attempting to not just retell real world stories. I would much prefer this wasn't the case. Have no issue with it being an important philosophy for some, though.
Yeah, I like this for like an individual cult within an area, not like an entire nation. Hammond, Gorka Borka's monotheism. That that's not true, Hammond. That's not true. Serpanza, Reddit Gotrek and Felix short story in Araby with evil wizard caliphs, scantily clad veiled women, and everyone being duplicitous. Excited to learn about not that.
Yeah, kind of agreed. Serpanza, kind of agreed.
Some authors have had better takes than others. It do be that way. Professor Shop. Hey Andy, it's Sotek. Hope you two are having a good day. Yeah, we're doing okay.
Great.
Been looking forward to this dive into Araby. Would you say Araby influence comes from Middle East as a whole? Like, could there be Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and other influences? Yes. See earlier diatribe.
Holy crap! Have they pretty much just dropped everything into one place to the point that even when I'll get to it actually when I do my intro.
Cool. On a lighter note, I've mentioned this before. If Araby ever made a faction, I really wanted to have a Zumbarak from IRL early modern Persian empires. Swivel guns on cattles. Yeah, that should absolutely be in there.
That's the sort of crap that we're looking for.
Yeah. Skylar Martin, seen the motivational Chaos Gods meme? Slanesh, it's okay to cry. Zinch, things will get better. Nurgle, the struggle will end. Korn, murder is okay.
That's motivational.
One of those took a bit of a turn. Yeah, just kill him. It solves all my problems. Listener Chris, so does Araby and Nehekara have some shared history? Yes, it does, and it's an important part
quite a lot, in fact. A lot. Araby
we'll
and
get into it.
Ekara have tons of it. In the same way that, for example, when we're discussing any of the old world nations, you find that Tilia and Estalia are frequently brought up, but never with a full section of detail that makes you go, okay, I now fully understand this place.
Will you discuss Walach
Yes.
Harkon in his book? Yes, we will. If Araby was manufactured, I think Fantandira should be one of their legendary lords. She's an option. I'll put it that way. She is an option. I don't know if she's the person you should go to, but she's an option, and obviously she would bring a lot more fun color to the Border Princes. We'll get into who Fantandira is for anyone that doesn't know later. Yeah. Worst X Morky Mischievous. I've seen a place in Araby in Total War Warhammer called the Wizard Caliph's Palace. Do we know who the Wizard Caliph was, or is he just a Jafar type figure? I don't think we know who the modern.
We have an actual Jafar type figure. Wait.
Yeah. We have Jafar. But I don't think we know who modernly is set up there. The Wizard Caliph's Palace is more than likely somewhere where it is like a dynasty of Wizard Caliphs that have existed for a very long time. It's unless they were to examine it and decide to make it one guy who's lived for a very long time, which could also be the case. But there's just not a lot of information about that particular location. It's kind of just a place on a map.
Yeah.
Thoughts Apprentice, hot take. Araby should be monotheistic, but believe all the gods and spirits of the world are aspects of God. Blind men touching an elephant, unique.
I would rather, if we're doing something like that, to tell a far bigger story with somewhere like End. But I think the blind men touching the elephant analogy is a fun and interesting side story, but I don't feel it would be all that unique because it's a tale that many people have used as side stories in multiple iterations of the setting. There is too many writers, for example, who've tried to claim that Sigmar's the only god. All the rest of them are just chaos gods, and Sigmar's all that matters. This wouldn't be that unique a take, and thus I wouldn't be that interested in pawning off on Araby when there's such bigger, broader, more interesting tales we could potentially tell.
Yeah, for me, it boils down to that I like that idea as a concept. I once again think that could be for an individual cult or like a specialized group. I actually do agree with Andy that I could see that almost being more of an End take than an Arabian take. But yeah. Phil, well, somebody who's been working on his own Araby headcanon is convinced that Araby has as much potential for diversity as the old world. I'm looking forward to this. Yeah. Awesome. And we're caught up. Intro time.
Okay, right. So Araby, I had one version of this intro planned. I'm going to go with a slightly more brief version, given that we're already 40 minutes into our stream, and I'm keen to actually discuss Araby and the various iterations that we've had over time and what it means for potentially the Araby that we might get from the old world should it ever be tackled. But for me, Araby starts in one place. Everybody's got their own version of how they started with something in Warhammer, and it's often when they were kids first being exposed to Warhammer for the first time, and that was the case for me. I remember being a pretty young chap, so we're going all the way back to 1989. 1989, I bought this, Zaragoz. This is a book that includes the tale of Orfeo the Minstrel. Now, for those of you who read this book, you'll immediately go, oh, I see where Andy's going with this, and you would be right. Because this book here starts and is framed by a story where a caliph and a minstrel are talking. And to cut a long story short, we get ourselves our first introduction to Warhammer's version of Araby. And the minstrel tells a tale to this individual, and it's all about different things that happened in the old world. It's the first book of a trilogy. The second book, Plague Demon, takes place in the Border Princes. The third book, Storm Warriors, takes place up in Albion. And Zaragoz was the first time that I had ever encountered Warhammer's Araby. It's not the first time I've been playing Warhammer or Warhammer games. It's just the first time that I became aware that it was a place inside the Warhammer world. And this is all the way back in 1989. And you might think, okay, that's a pretty early source. So is that where it all began? Oh, hell no. Because Araby's first mention is in Warhammer 1st edition. all the way back to the very first edition of the game. Because when Warhammer was first put together, I mean, it's not the only reason it existed, but one of the reasons it existed was so that people could pool all their fantasy miniatures and their real world miniatures together into one big battle. And that meant that you could take the rather popular Arabian, real world Arabian miniatures and use them and face them off against your dwarf army that you might have from J.R.R. Tolkien. And the Warhammer rules allowed this. And in there, they discussed their Men of the East. Now, you may note that Men of the East in what becomes the Warhammer world is a very poor description for Araby, because they are, in fact, Men of the South as far as the Old World is concerned. But you will find that most Old World writers forget this, because they think of the real world, Arabian Peninsula and Islam, and they think of it as Middle Eastern, because it is to the real world. But in Warhammer, it isn't. It's in the south, just north of the Southlands, in fact. It doesn't have this great Eastern feel. It is not an Eastern land or Middle Eastern promise or any similar cliche. Araby is in the south, but in the very first iteration of it, it's marked as the lands to the east. And in that book, we had it was mentioned earlier in the stream. Can we bring that? I don't need to bring it up. Mad Mullah, Ackland. Now, he's named after Tony Ackland, the artist who did literally all their art at that time. And that, I think, speaks to many of the original iterations for how the Games Workshop studio dealt with their material for Araby. And it's that place that we can use our Arabian models with, and we'll make lots of little in jokes with. Or we will make references to things that we have seen elsewhere. For example, if we take a look at the Arabian that was brought up in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay's first edition's version of The Enemy Within, you had the great Arabian Salad Bar, who's basically just a salad bar. And you might think, a salad bar? That's a crap name. Well, they just stole it from the Two Ronnies. Two Ronnies? Yeah, it was the Two Ronnies. Pretty sure it was Two Ronnies. I'm trying to remember the sketch. Pretty sure it's the Two Ronnies. And they just stole that and ported a sketch from the 80s into Warhammer because, hey, it made them laugh. And you'll find that that was often how the original iterations of Araby were expressed to first edition, second edition, and third edition of Warhammer. It was this place where all of their stereotypes of what it was to be Arabian were placed. What it was like to be a great desert nomad. What it was like to have a great mercantile empire from the north of Africa or some equivalent in the Warhammer world. However, as time went on, tastes changed. As we moved over into Warhammer 4th edition, there was that great moment of, will we include Araby as one of the core armies? Because when Warhammer 4th edition came out and they got the first big box set for Warhammer, they redid all of Warhammer's lore and they brought it up to date and made it new and fresh. And Araby was not included except as something that is found elsewhere. It had no army, it had no extra bits, they didn't provide any additional detail other than Araby exists to the east, south. And when I say east, I mean south. That's how the writers do it, because from this point onward, you'll often find them referred to as men of the east, but they are not. They are men of the south. Let's just get that into our heads. And Araby becomes, during the course of Warhammer 4th edition, up to Warhammer pretty much 6th, becomes this place that has no army and they occasionally refer to and clearly don't know what to do with. Now, through the course of the Crusades, this great event that happens in the Warhammer world, Araby is mentioned a lot. So this happens around about the same time as the real world Crusades through the 14th, 15th centuries, as far as the imperial calendar is concerned. That means 1,000 years before the end of the world. And the Crusades happen when Sultan Jafar moves from Araby, this ancient land to the south, and invades the old world to the north. And it's effectively a century's worth of war. All of Tilia and Estalia are taken except for maybe Tabaro, and depending on which version you read, different places do better or worse, and the Bretonnians do a giant crusade into Estalia, as do parts of the Empire. The story is told in lots of different ways, but some of the core massive, huge knightly orders that we know today from the Empire have their orders foundation at about this point, 1,000 years ago. And the Sultan Jafar is nothing more than a bad guy to kill. A big, huge wizard from the south that they will now murder. And it's written in a very, they're the bad guys fashion, rather than discussing it in a far more nuanced way, as you'll often find when we discuss, say, for example, wars between Britonia and the Empire, where it's often discussed in a nuanced fashion. They don't do it in a nuanced way. And it's not until we get our first real army for Araby, which is for Warmaster, a game that was released circa around about 2000, so about 1999, 2000, when Warmaster came out. I remember when that came out, and the army list itself came out a few years after that, that we get our first full army list. And in this army
you're
list,
correct, 2000.
Thank you. This army list is a chocolate block full worth of extra little details, and really nicely, it was also put together by Rick Priestley. So for those out there who are going, this isn't real Warhammer because it's in Warmaster, nonsense. Rick wrote Warmaster, and he wrote the Arabian army list, and it's full of lovely details, including elephants, flying carpets, Djinn, a whole variety of different levels for your leadership, ranging from the sultans and the caliphs all the way down to the sheikhs and the nomads that come from the Sahara Desert itself. It was a lovely update for Araby, and when I say update, first real stab, because Araby had never had an army up to this point. If you go back to 3rd edition Warhammer, which is where most of the unexpected armies can be found, there's not really a proper army in that edition at all. And 2nd edition and 1st edition, they only really offered armies of the East, and the armies of the East included Araby.
They were almost more like specialized mercenaries that you could take.
Totally. And you couldn't even get if you go to Warhammer Armies for 3rd edition, a lovely wee book, it's got little mercenary contingents for everyone, except for Araby. They're just not in that book. Sucks. So they were nothing more than a mention in, for example, Warhammer 5th edition, Dogs of War, where you got Al-Mukhtar's Desert Dogs. Al-Mukhtar's not actually from Araby, so screw that, guys, from Marienburg. Cut a long story short, they sort of dodge around everything that Araby could offer until Warmaster. And Warmaster grounds the place back into the Warhammer world for the first time. And then from that point onwards, they pretty much ignore the place again. You get a mention here or there, particularly in novels, because novels love to say an Arabian merchant, because it's always a merchant, because they need to have an excuse to have an Arabian person in the old world. So you'll find that a lot of people's core thoughts whenever they think of Araby is merchants, because that's pretty much all you meet. Occasionally, pirates, because you might meet them on the high seas. Pirates and merchants! And you'll often find the description for the cities that have been provided for us, very scant though they may be, is often really rich merchants, pirates, and merchants and pirates. Oh, and there's a bunch of people out in the waste, the nomad clans. Yeah, there's those guys too. Tribes. No, I mean tribes. No, I mean I don't know what I mean. There's people out there that live in the desert. And that's about it. And as we move all the way up to modern Warhammer, 2nd edition Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing to 3rd edition Warhammer Role-Playing to 4th, again, they're nothing really more than merchants and travelers from afar that come in. We have a lovely mention, a really lovely mention of them over in Dreadfleet, where one of the core ships was an Arabian vessel with great elemental forces.
Out of nowhere, I might add.
Literally nowhere. And our great golden ship that's in that is just brilliant. A lovely extra edition. But it's a single edition in a fringe game. And that is, I think, the best way to think of Araby as far as most writers are concerned. It's a fringe concern that they can just drop a little detail about. And that's where, when we come in, things become complicated. Because when you actually take a look at how many writers have done this, oh, and here's my Arabian friend, and he comes, and he just drops, here's a random piece of Arabian lore, and then walks off.
That is so accurate to doing research for this episode. It's painful how accurate that is.
and just walks off. And we're talking in novels, we're talking Citadel journals, we're talking in White Dwarf, we're talking in a random game, army lists in particular. So many army lists will say, then the Arabians come. Here's a random Arabian fact, and then they fucked off and we never saw them again.
Hey there, friend. Did you know there is a dangerous species of creature called dune dragons? All right, I gotta go. Bye.
Dragons.
You're like,
okay, so
what? Wait, come back.
Are they different to the desert dragons or the sand dragons? Because there are 3 separate types of dragon mentioned for Araby. Dune dragon, desert dragon, sand dragon. Are they all the same thing? Who can be certain? Because they were made up by different authors at different times. That's where we are today. So kicking around here when we record this in 2025. I can't believe I looked at the computer to tell me the date. That was pointless. What we have is an enormous number of fragments. I mean, a huge number spread across roleplay books, White Dwarves, Citadel journals, comics, so many novels, and all of them combined actually make an extraordinarily detailed and fragmented discussion as to what Araby could be. Now, that's where I'm going to end the introduction. It's not what Araby is, it's what it could be. Because as we all know, Games Workshop, when they eventually tackle somewhere, they tend to just go, what can we do to make this place cool? And whilst they might make a nod to what was written before, they'll often just overwrite it. Take, for example, Grand Cathay. Grand Cathay is not the Grand Cathay that we had through 8 editions of Warhammer. They just made something completely new. Completely. Take a look at Kislev. When I rebuilt Kislev, along with my co-authors in the Kislev book, we had significantly less material to deal with than was presented inside the various smorgasbord of options for Araby, which there was tons, and we tied it all together and created a new version of Kislev. We haven't had a new version yet of Araby, which means everything we're going to be discussing today isn't what Araby is. Everything we're going to be discussing today is what Araby might be. All drawn from the various different sources that have been cobbled together by us as we've had a good little look at everything that can be found. I will also make one other point pretty clear. We are not going to cover everything in this stream. Often when we're discussing one of our subjects, we say, there's not very much in this one, so we can go dive in depth with this one. For this one, there is actually an enormous amount of material, and covering it all is almost going to be futile. However, covering the core blanket of what Araby is, what it was, the 4 main cities of what the Araby has currently, moving out to the smaller cities, and then eventually the great nomad tribes. Yes, we can cover all that, but be aware there are going to be 100 examples that we're not going to be discussing, either because they're clearly ancient and we shouldn't be discussing them too much. For example, just how old is Mad Mullah's books? Good old Tony Ackland's reference back in the original Warhammer 1. And how important is what's in Warhammer 1 anyway? Well, it gave us Grom the Paunch. It gave us Joseph Bugman. But as we all know, both those characters significantly changed when they were brought in for later editions. So, yeah.
Yeah.
We should go.
We should. Yeah, the first edition book, if you ever want to laugh, go back and read it, because that in the way it's broken, you can find it on Internet Archives very easily. And they have it split up into a couple books. And the one that has like all the characters where Akhled is from also has like Goldfag Maneater and Joseph Bugman and stuff, but they are so different than what you'll expect them to be, and it's very funny.
Yeah.
Also, this just made me laugh. Lore consistency is the mind killer.
The little death. Yeah, quite.
Yeah. All right, let's get caught up on super chat stuff, and then we're just gonna run. Ro, thank you very much for the generous super chat, my dude. First time catching you live. Oh, well, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You guys managed to rekindle my childhood passion for Warhammer Fantasy. Keep up the good work. Question: is it true that Arabian riles are used elsewhere in the old world? I'm not sure what a rile is supposed to be.
Okay, so the rile is their currency. And yes, much like any foreign currency, they are used pretty much anywhere where people will take coin, because the coins in the old world and down in Araby have got actual wealth involved with them, wrapped up in them. It's why gold coins are normally smaller than silver coins, because gold is more precious, so you need less of it to make the coin. And it'll often be alloyed if someone wants to make a larger coin. So it is true that they are used because they have actual worth, because they're made of gold or silver or whatever else. But you'll tend to find that they're only found commonly in places like Marienburg, the larger city ports, where you will find traders from other lands frequently using their coinage. But yes, absolutely true.
Yep. Nival or Gnival, one of those. Monotheism would be interesting if they took the Neoplatonic route, especially as that philosophy was kept alive by IRL MENA cultures.
There are lots of routes towards it, but then the same arguments can be laid out for why don't we have the Catholic Church in Europe, because it's such a core component of Europe, and then Protestantism that came afterwards. And the reason is because the Warhammer world doesn't have one god, it has multiple gods. And I think that falling back on the standard tropes for other games is not really what we're looking for here. Warhammer is different.
I agree. I also think that if you're wanting to create Araby, which obviously everyone who I think is showing up for this stream would very much like, you want to avoid what could become potential pitfalls, things that could lead to Araby becoming problematic. And I think the idea of like, oh, well, we should make Araby the uniquely monotheistic culture in the Warhammer world is, I think it's a very needlessly slippery ladder to try and climb, when we can explore some very, very fascinating ideas that we'll talk about this stream that would fit much better in with the universe that we have, as opposed to trying to force this square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, I agree.
Donoman, in fact, not only is it south, it's also west of the old world, according to most maps. Yeah, I don't know why they're called Men of the East. They under any circumstances.
Now, I can understand it in first edition and second edition, because in first edition and second edition, they hadn't established their own Warhammer map yet. It just hadn't really been built. And then as we move into third edition, and the map is very clearly made, I think Jez did the first one, Jez Goodwin, can't necessarily claim that to be true. I need to double check. But the most famous one that we all know, the very first one in both Warhammer third edition and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay first edition, was done by Jez Goodwin. Araby is in the south. It's as simple as that.
Let's see. Listen, Chris. So, is there not Sinbad the Sailor? He's probably out there somewhere.
There almost certainly should be a version of this, but spun up in a Warhammery way.
Yeah, I don't recall one off the top of my head, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's not out there somewhere in some obscure reference.
There is a lack of, definitely though, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Donovan, there are many cities of Araby that are mentioned in lore, but not on maps like Air. Do you think they should be placed on the southern coast? Doing so would be an easy way of detailing the area, but it would also potentially make the area around the Gulf of Meads less isolated.
So I think the answer to that is probably no. And the reason for that is that the Gulf of Meads down in the south is an area that gets colonized, and it would be more difficult to colonize if there's already large cities and all the networks to support those cities in place. It is not going to be a clear area for colonization. So I think I would prefer to use the west and the north and use those areas to be the Araby that we all know, and down in the south and around those areas, much more dangerous, many more problems. So I think that would be my preference, but I could be one in a different direction for a good reason.
Yeah, honestly, the areas like the where you have like the Western Isles, the Western coast up along following the mountain range to the northern coast until you hit Bel Aliad should be a significantly more densely populated region than it ultimately is. Because we'll talk about like the four great cities, because a lot of people don't realize how zoomed out we are when you're looking at Araby. If you were to go in, it's a big fucking place. Araby's huge.
Those four great cities is the equivalent of, in the Empire, Nuln, Talabheim, Middenheim, and Altdorf. Just those four. And that would be the 4 great cities of the empire. But we know there are significantly more cities in the empire than that alone. So we have more than enough space. I'm looking at the old map of Araby right now. The actual area of land that we have from the west and some of the forests that are down there, up through the land of assassins, up all the way up to the northern coast, past the pirate coast of Araby, all the way over towards where eventually we border into Zandri. All of that area is as big as the empire. We don't need more space. It doesn't need to be a bigger area. We've got more than enough to deal with in that alone.
Ahoy! Any Dune style giant worm riders in Araby? Not yet, but there should be. I would kill for that as a monster unit.
Riding sand dragons, stroke desert dragons, stroke.
Yeah. Yeah, like a sand worm, but it's with a Y. Yeah, that would be sick. That should absolutely be a unit. That would be a very fun unit. That'd be fun.
He's an Al-Gaib.
Yeah. Poor Misha. This may seem like a stupid question. There are genuinely no stupid questions in the show. I cannot iterate that strong enough. Is there a relationship between Lizardmen and Araby considering they're close to each other? Yes.
I'm going to say something here. They're not close to each other.
They're not close at all.
They're really not. I'm saying they're close to each other is like saying I'm going to look at map right in front of me. Is like saying that the Empire is close to the Chaos Dwarves. They're not. They are separated by an enormous amount of space, including a lot of very difficult territory. Now, does that mean that there are never any interactions? Of course it doesn't. But they are not close in the greater scheme of things.
Yeah, they might be like the closest nations to one another, but there is a horrible desert between the two of them. That's borderline impassable, which is why
the jungles and then the mountains, and it's just a mess.
Which is why there's a whole legendary story about Ibn Jalaba. Ibn Jalaba is an explorer who was trying to find an overland route to the jungles of the Southlands from Araby, because it's that fucking far and hostile. He had to go on a great quest to see if you could go there by land. And he ends up running into the Lizardmen and has a situationship with them where the Lizardmen are ultimately kind of like, yeah, no, y'all can't come in here. But they give him a bunch of stuff and he leaves.
To give an idea just here for the scale, think of all of the old world, all of it. Think of all of Araby. And if you go south to the Southlands, you've got all of that again. Okay, it's a really big area. A really, really big area down the south. We've got a lot to play with.
Yeah, there's even actually a funny joke that the Arabians had a legend that
sounds silly.
I know, I can't help it. I'm not trying to say it that way. That's just the way it comes out sometimes. The Arabians have a legend about Saurian reptile men that they call the Al-Sarim. And so when Ibn Jalaba meets the Lizardman, he's like, oh my god, it's the Al-Sarim that I've heard about in like legend stuff when they supposedly came up and attacked ages ago. So there's a story there, which is cute and fun. And if Araby ever got redone, it's likely this would show up in like the history records or something. It'd probably just make a timeline appearance, and that's all they're going to say on it. Phil, so what are the chances that an official version of Araby is dominated by immortal rulers, which might be their move judging from Grand Cathay? I would guess almost impossible, because GW, as much as I like to make fun of them, they tend to be pretty good about making sure that the various factions don't repeat each other's tropes. Like, you don't see all of the elves ruled by demigods, just the wood elves. You don't see all of the elves ruled by elves that are so old they've been here since before the cataclysm. That's the dark elves. Okay. The high elves have like a democratic electoral system. So like kind of sort of electorate by the very wealthy princes and princesses, but it's more democratic than the other two because at least the rulers change. So they tend to be pretty good about making sure the various factions have different systems in place. So I don't think they'd be anything like Grand Cathay.
So yeah, Phil, no is the answer to this. And if they did do that, I'd be sorely disappointed because it would weaken Grand Cathay and it would weaken Araby and make them less interesting in both cases.
Yeah, one of the stories that we'll talk about in a little bit is some of the way some writers have treated how Araby felt about Sultan Jafar, who was kind of close to becoming this. And I like the versions that we'll kind of talk about where Soldier Jafar was pretty universally hated by the people of Araby. But we'll get into that. Singemeister, do you fellas have an Araby bibliography?
No, not really. I mean, I've read a bajillion books and, of course, Arabian Nights. But I don't have one to hand. I mean, it wouldn't be too difficult. I've got a library full of books of all sorts. But I don't have one to hand. I'm sorry to say, Singemeister.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. 1001 Arabian Nights is a very good starting place. But you know, this is one of those things where there are probably people much better equipped than us to give you a good reading list.
Whoa, what happened there?
I like that you just got a ghost. Like you got
That's
you're
the
like haunted
second
over there.
time that's happened now.
Yeah, I know. Necromancer Cobalt.
I forget where it came from.
Expand Araby. I hope they include elite soldiers possessed by Jinn, men coated in flame or flying around atop tornadoes. So, I mean,
that's sort of what their sorcerers are already doing. So I'm not entirely sure that would be necessarily an elite soldier type. I mean, you could, but I'm not entirely sure that you'd want to water down what the Jinn do for their magic users, or indeed what their magic users are. It's almost taking another example of it and propping on. I mean, you maybe could, but
yeah, there might be something you could do there, but I could almost see that being kind of like a fun side story about someone tried to do this once and it didn't go well. Because possession usually doesn't go well.
Yeah, Warhammer possession is bad.
Yeah. So yeah. Nystra, Araby farmer. Did you know that there are fruit that are picked during the night? Okay, bye. Yeah, that's actually okay. I'll give you a perfect example that I was looking at. I was like, oh, I should do more research into this, and realized it was a dead end that made me sad. So in Gotrek and Felix Skaven Slayer, there is a non-Arabian character who basically says something along the lines of, I'm a good doctor, but to explain, and William King, or Bill King, who is the author of the early Gotrek and Felix books and is very beloved, needed essentially an excuse to have like an actually very good doctor in the story, but he didn't want to give the Empire those really good doctors because the Empire's medical science has some backwards practices. So what did he do? Well, he introduced a doctor character who goes, well, I trained to be a doctor down in the city of Kasabar, which is the city of medicine and is a wonderful city with a great program on medicine that's very advanced. Okay, bye. That's it. That's all they leave you with. And you're like, wait, come back. I want to know more. And that's it. So yeah. Phil, you can tell GW was uninspired when designing Araby because they refer to their god as either Allah or
a
real Persian god. Probably a contender for the most lazy lore. It's up there.
And yeah, but it's also old lore. But you've got to remember that all the way back in Warhammer First Edition and Second Edition, they were just doing real world ports pretty much, and they didn't really develop the fantasy real world stuff that much. Later on, it became much more of a thing, particularly when you move past into Warhammer 4th Edition. And by Warhammer 4th Edition, they never really update it. So they don't update what came before. You're right. It would almost certainly be rewritten nowadays.
Yeah. Downman, future stream suggested religion in the Empire. Often you discuss how almost everyone in the Empire is polytheistic, including the cults. However, the way the cults often come across as rival monotheists, really is at a very zoomed out level. They obviously aren't, but surface level lore sometimes makes them present like they are. That is a good idea for a stream. I agree.
Yeah, not bad at all, Dynaman.
T-Ball 31. Zinch is the main antagonist of Cathay. If you had to assign other gods to undeveloped factions, who would they go? Where? I think Slon / End. Slanesh. Not Slon. Antagonizing End, core antagonizing Araby, Nurgle. Okay, so Nurgle Lorebeards. Sorry, I've almost missed that one. That was very funny. That caught me off guard. So, generally speaking, this is not going to be a popular take, but I'm going to say it. You should not do this with the Dark Gods. You should not assign them a good guy faction that they are the primary antagonist to, because I genuinely think you'll end up getting yourself into trouble. I would agree that Zinch is the primary antagonist to Grand Cathay, but that is kind of a unique dynamic that has to do with Cathay's like system of harmony and all this stuff, and Cathay has its own inner turmoils. But as Cathay gets developed, I guarantee you the other three will start to show up. It's just that Cathay is very simple right now. Now, it could be that with Araby, I will tell you right now, and we'll talk about it a little bit, that Tzeentch in many ways has been the primary antagonist of Araby. Tzeentch has a huge role in Araby's history. But that's just kind of what Tzeentch does. Tzeentch is this long-term scheming.
I'll rejig that slightly, and I'll say that often when you look at Warhammer, it's all about top-tier politics, and that is where Tzeentch often plays, and it makes it look like Tzeentch is a core deity in antagonism to most of the Warhammer world as a whole. Factions, because that's what Tzeentch does. Slaanesh infiltrates and corrupts from within many a top-tier situation, but does it far more gently and subtly. And Nurgle is just the big, great, all the people catch the diseases, give to despair, turn against whatever. All the other gods are there doing their thing. Khorne is often just forgotten, even though he is frequently said to be the most powerful of them all, the one who gets the most worship across the world, but nevertheless, writers tend to forget about him. I would instead say that the very nature of how Warhammer is written makes Tzeentch often stand at the top, because they talk about the special characters and their wizards. And the special characters and their wizards are often top-tier political figures, and that is often the realm of Tzeentch.
Yeah, so it boils down to that.
It's how Warhammer's written.
When you're zoomed out like that, Tzeentch is often going to appear to be the big bad, because in some ways he kind of is. If you go play Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the only big campaign we have across all the editions has Tzeentch as the big bad.
Yeah. But the greatest threat to the old world, if we go by the standard breakdowns, is Khorne. Yeah. And that's something that we should definitely always try to remember as we're creating and developing new parts for Warhammer as a whole.
Yeah. That being said, if I had to, I would probably have more fun with Slaanesh and Araby than Khorne, personally. If I wasn't allowed to use Tzeentch, for instance, because I think there are aspects when we get into Arabian, the way they're vaguely implied to be. They're a very, very wealthy nation, which you might not think they are, but they are.
Martech in particular sounds like Slaanesh would be sitting right down into its core, in the same way that Slaanesh is often whispered to be sitting right to the core of Nuln, but often that's just simple stereotyping. So yeah, I think that Slaanesh is almost certainly to be a core component of much of the corruption in Araby, but then so is Nurgle, so is Khorne, and so is Tzeentch. I do not like separating them out that much, because the world has rotten from its core, and the rot is never just a single deity.
Yep. Sinjmeister, thoughts on El Kalabad or Kasabar's West African? They could be later at some point.
Yeah.
Here, I'll give you an unfortunate fact. Based on, not the roleplay game, but just GW, you are very hard-pressed to find anything African anywhere in the Warhammer setting.
Yeah, it's really disappointing. And I have been multiply disappointed by this. I think I would rather not dilute Araby by taking somewhere like, say, El Kalabad and taking their southern reach down on the south side of the Arabian Peninsula, and say that that's actually, no, it's just West African. I'd be looking for it to be culturally different and possibly have some West African connotations and possibly have some influences in there. But I would really rather just have a proper Southlands. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I would be much more interested in someone taking me into the Southlands rainforests and exploring how humanity is.
There's an entire coast on the Southlands in the west that is bigger than Arabian's coast on the western side. That's where we should be having our equivalent of West African influences, at least. So I would much prefer it was there, but I can completely understand for people who are desperate to have more influence of that sort of material in their games, that they will take what Dribblings Games Workshop has offered and develop it from there.
Yeah. Blue Oyster Cultist, no other immortal rulers but about the 1000 gods of End. If you can find a source telling me what those are, I'll happily weigh in on that, but they're very mysterious.
Who says that they're the rulers?
Yeah, they might just be spirits or entities.
You can equally argue there's 1,000 gods in the Empire, but we'd never say that it's ruled by the gods.
Yeah. Ben H, I'm running my first Wolfram game today. Thanks for all the lore to bombard my players with. Good luck and have fun.
Good luck, Ben H. Have fun with that. That'll be awesome. Do tell us how it turned out.
Mr. K, Zinch tricks Araby into worshiping a false divinity who in turn is Zinch. That is, it's a okay. I'm going to say this. Take this. This is not meant against you personally. Let me just throw this out there. This to me could come off very dangerously as, oh, look at the one culture that is been tricked into worshiping a devil god or like an evil god, and somehow every other culture in the world has avoided this. That could be spun in a really nasty way. And it's also something that I think you would be much more likely to explore in more of like an Eastern Steppe or Norska environment, not a Araby environment. Zinch does stuff in Araby, which we will talk about. Zinch does do some tricks and some nasty shit in Araby, but I think this particular story frame I would look at and go, I don't think that would necessarily work as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with cults twisting things round. They do it all over the place. This is, for example, a core component of one of the Zinch cults in the Empire. So this is not something you can't do, but given the potential cultural sensitivities here, it's something that if you do, you could do very, very wrong and look like an absolute arse for doing so. So yeah, it's something you've got to be very careful about, Mr. K.
Yeah, that being said, could this be the case in like one of the Arabian cities? Sure.
Yeah.
Or like one of the desert tribes? Rising. Sure, that would be perfect. Charles C.K. So Arabians descend from Southlanders who went north, or is an ancient cradle of humanity like Cathay? Should they have African influence in parts? So there's no like yes or no to that. It's just it could be. There's not a lot of detail back then.
Right. So, Charles, what we know for certain is that there were various human tribes in the world when the old ones came. We know also for certain that Cathay has dragons look after some human tribes, that Albion has the old ones look after some human tribes, that there were human tribes elsewhere, and that the Southlands is often remarked as having lots of human tribes that came from it. So the answer is sure. It's going to be one big hodgepodge of everything. We also know that, for example, the old world is populated by several tribes that came across the world's edge and also came from the south, which would have included peoples that were almost certainly be descended from, say, Nehekara, from Araby. And they are ones that came to settle in the empire. The empire that we have today isn't this great white homeland that is generally understood by real world connections, because the tribes that came from the south and came over from the south aren't white. Some of the tribes that came from the north across the mountains were white, loosely speaking, but the empire is a cultural melange. And I think that would be the case for the Araby as well. Araby is going to have quite a lot from the south, bits from the north. It's going to be a lovely mixing pool like the rest of the Warhammer world. And I see no reason that you couldn't have African influence in there if you wish to do so.
Yep. Parmisha, how can we place Araby among Warhammer races neutral and also located in a desert land makes Araby isolationist like Azrael? Okay, so Araby's not in the desert. It's on mostly actually a coastal nation that follows along the western to northern coastline of that northwestern part of the Southlands. The desert, or the Sahara Desert, that's like the big desert, not a lot of people live there. We have the nomadic desert tribes, which we will discuss, are kind of one of the core cultural groups in Araby, but they are often kind of almost they're their own unique cultural group within Araby, and they roam around because the desert will kill your ass if you try and live there. So most of Araby are very, very close to the coast. They're on like the western side of the Vulture and Adelan Mountains, or just north of it. So they trade with everybody.
We need to speed up through our next few.
Yes, we actually have like quite a few notes that we'll actually talk about a little bit, that Araby has like dealt with the elves for a really, really long time. And they're very open, and they have quarters for different people. There's noted to be notable elf districts in Kafir and Lashik, if memory serves. And there's also a dwarf quarter, I think, in Kafir. And like they love visitors too. Like Arabians in Warhammer are said to be very, very fond of bringing in people from other cultures to live in their cities, and they're very, very friendly people because they trade and trading sciences and stuff. They are all for it. They're one of the most pro foreigner Warhammer nations for a lot of reasons. Druzina, who is the hottest / spiciest food? Chaos Dwarfs, South Cathay, Araby, or Kislev? Because this is the only way to keep the food thawed. I don't know if that's how that works.
That's not how physics works. Nice one though, Drusina.
That would be. I mean, that'd be up to you, man. That's not something that's been culinary info in Warhammer is pretty scant.
I can tell you the answer from LAWhammer because this is something that we've organized, and for my own personal game, the hottest, spiciest of those food wouldn't be Kislev because they often use in our ones ice peppers, which actually have a closer to a cold, mentholated feel, where they make your mouth feel cold hot, so to speak, rather than hot. So not those. Out of these ones, Chaos Dwarves, no. Their foodstuff's very different. South Cathay, yes. Araby, often.
Yeah. Downman, just reference on scale, just the core bit of Araby from the Wizard Cals to Al Haik from the coast to the Adelan Mountains is roughly the size as Bretonnia, ignoring map projection images. It's narrower than Bretonnia, but it's much larger. The distance is basically the same as Middenheim to Magritta, and that is ignoring already ignoring the deserts. The area southeast of the deserts is just labeled Araby, has no lore, and a bit about the Gulf to Mid is the desert does have some lore, but we'll get into that in a little bit.
It does.
Hammond, Nurgle hates racism. Don't be racist.
Yeah, so pay attention to Nurgle.
Pay attention to Nurgle. Phil, one thing any writer who wants to tackle Araby should know is that their geography comes with all the downsides of the Middle East, mostly harsh, arid land, not mentioning the actual desert, virtually none of its actual upsides, not a crucial trade corridor between the east, west of Eurasia, no great rivers to build centralized states around. Key part for the factors, mostly hub. Tomb Kings, what do you think? So it is a much different setup. There's supposed to be a couple of notable rivers in Araby that haven't been well detailed on maps coming down from the mountains out into the ocean. So, and that's where those cities should be built along. The ones that are near the mountains is that they're meant to be built for those mountains to dump their waters out into the ocean. It just hasn't been realized that well mapped. Like there's a mention in some Araby lore about the Great Serpent River, which is supposed to be some great river that separates a part of Araby, but it's not really detailed anywhere. So yeah, I agree, but Araby should also look a little different if the developers of it were thinking about it. Rotating Potato, I realize it's a bit off topic, but could y'all be open to covering some of the more or less known nations like Indra, Nepal? Eventually, yes. Also, first Ono. Oh, well, thank you, Rotating Potato. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Minoru Iruma, random question. Dwarves usually fight in cramped halls and underways and halls. Why don't they use spears? Culture thing or GW battle game issue is in the lore.
Oh, we've discussed this more than once.
Yeah,
and it's also worth noting they don't live in cramped underways and halls. They build big.
Yeah, they build very, very wide. The reason you don't usually see them using spears and like the underway type things is it's usually, according to the lore, it's like two guys. Ironbreakers tend to be in very small groups.
They're fighting in close quarters with little axes behind shields.
Yeah. So, and would they use them in the setting? Probably more often, yes. To be bluntly honest. But it's more of a style choice.
Yeah, it's 100% something that happened in lore because it is an effective weapon and it's a cheap weapon. However, for very clear rule of cool reasons, that's not what dwarves often use during armies.
Yeah, Dirt this man server. Here's a what if idea. What if Cetra became an Everchosen? I
mean, he doesn't bow.
Yeah, that would not be Cetra then.
Yeah, it would be a very different character to Cetra as we know it.
Roma Scott, thank you very much. Okay, so oh god, we got caught up, or at least a little
bit.
So discussion about Araby. I think a good place to start. I'll let Andy choose. Should we start with history or should we start with the 4 great cities?
Why don't we? Because we've got quite a lot to cover and not a great deal of time. Apportion it up with where Araby came from because it's pretty loose there. And then move on to discussing what the shape of Araby is today. Is 4 great cities, and also the fact that that's only one part of it as you move off towards the tribes that are out in the deserts itself.
Okay, great. So oldest thing we know about Araby, right? So Nehekar and Araby established roughly around the same time. From what records we have, humans came out of the rainforest in the south and started migrating north. Keep in mind that back then, the Nehekar was not nearly as harsh as it is now. The desert, the Sahara Desert, has always been a horrible, nasty-ass desert. So the people mostly migrated up into the east into what we have as Nehekara, because they were kinder lands and they had like the Great Vitae River and yada, yada, yada. It was easier for civilization to get started there. But there were some groups that went west into the desert who learned very quickly that you have to be very nomadic and you have to stay ahead, because the sandstorms of the Sahara Desert, which do make up part of Araby, because that's where the nomadic cultures live, the sandstorms there, the reason there's no settlements is that they're so brutal that if you get caught in those sandstorms, they've Warhammerified the sandstorms, where there's like supposedly screaming spirits and the wind is so strong it flays the flesh off of your bones because the grit of the sand, the wind is so powerful. And there are things out there, not only like horrible monsters and stuff, but elemental type spirits and other nasty little creatures hiding out there. The land of Araby has a very strong culture with elementals, which what exactly elementals are, if you've been on Lorebeards, we've talked a lot about that. They are etheric spirits, essentially. They are magical-esque creatures that are similar to dryads or naiads, which we've talked a lot about, that are often bound to some physical type places, and which is very interesting because this part of the world is usually said not to be very magically strong. We're very close to the equator, and so the winds of magic coming down from the North Pole and up from the South Pole, this is the hardest place for it to reach, which is a very fun part of Araby and Nehekar and lore when it's written well, because it explains why they developed unique relationships with magic. For instance, the Nehekarans, instead of exploring magic traditionally, explored their magic through their gods, because they...
I've just got one real world point to make here. Real world Araby is not the same as real world Araby. And one major difference is it's much, much further south. The equator in the real world, if you place it across, go take a look at it if you're sitting on a computer right now. I'm looking at it over on the side. It passes through the equivalent of halfway down the Southlands inside the Warhammer world. But the equator in the Warhammer world passes through the south of Araby. It is a completely different location. It is a far drier, harsher location. The real world Sahara Desert is all to the north of the equator, where the Warhammer equator kind of passes through their version. And because it's sitting on the equator, we are as far away from the North and the South Poles as we can possibly get in the Warhammer world, meaning that in this part of the world, you get just much less magic. There's just not as much. Now, are Games Workshop going to forget this when they discuss places, for example, in Lustria, or when they go over and they discuss what's happening in the hinterlands of Koresh? Yes, of course they are. Because as far as they're concerned, the equator is only desert place Araby, because that's pretty much how most of the writers think. But they do think that for Araby. I would suggest that if this was getting rewritten and someone sat down with it, they would instead take a slightly different view. They would say not just is it at the equator, which is true, but that the ancient network of stones, that's pulling magic out of the world is still in place here, almost untouched, meaning that magic is flooding out of Araby in a way that it isn't flooding out in the dense jungles that we'll find over in both east and west of Araby. Because what we have here is a place that is frequently described as having less ambient magic in the air, which also would suggest there's going to be less mutation in and around Araby than you would find elsewhere. Less chances of magic to pull up into Dar, less chances of things going wrong. But it does have its own natural spirits. And these spirits, for good or ill, are nasty. And many of them are terrible. And they're the ones that are scouring through the winds or down in the depths of some of the worst deserts that you find in the Great Desert of Araby. So most of the magic that you find that the Arabians are using had nothing to do with standard magic, which is channeling the winds of magic, saying words, and manifesting that into an effect. That's what most magic is in the Warhammer world. Some, if we take, for example, the original Hag's description in Kislev, they believe that's dangerous. They believe that instead they should channel and communicate with spirits to do magic on their behalf. And down in Araby, they take the same model, but for different reasons. It's not because it's dangerous, it's because there's not enough magic ambient to form the great spells. So instead, they use their ability to manipulate magic, to manipulate spirits, to manipulate jinn, to manipulate great ifrits, great things of Araby to do the magic on their behalf. And that translates to, typically when you're saying in top tier Warhammer speech, as we use elements to do the magic for us.
Yeah, which is super cool, and gives them a very unique relationship with magic. And we also know from really ancient Nehekara, so we're talking pre-Cetra, like ancient, when Nehekara would not be Nehekara, because Nehek hasn't really happened yet. And the Arabians probably don't even think of themselves as Arabians because they're still expanding along that coastline going around the desert. A lot of early knowledge of humanity came from these spirits, of people learning to capture or bargain with them, and these spirits would reveal truths about the world, which allowed humanity to learn things at a faster rate than they would otherwise. And this leads to this part of the world developing very, very quickly compared to other groups of humanity like way further north. And we see the rise of the Harkarans, who we don't really care about for this story, and the Arabians along the coastline. Now, the cool thing is, we do have notes. Unfortunately, most of it comes from older lore, but it's still something that I would consider vaguely canon, that the Arabians were one of the first human cultures to deal with the elves. The elves are expanding. They're setting up their colonies. And what's interesting is Araby is one of the only human factions in the world that did not build on top of elven ruins because they were already there.
Yep.
They were there first.
This is a lovely piece of difference between, say, for example, the old world to the north and Araby. A lot of people like to mix Araby up with the old world, but I'm less keen on that because the old world is generally stopping at the Badlands. Araby and all of the Arabian Peninsula over into Nehekara is ancient human set of civilizations not built upon the elves, but instead building up about the same time as the elves. A little bit later in most versions, but still around about the same time. Meaning that this concept of the elder races and their great cities that were there from the beginning that predate humanity is both in East and West just kind of a nonsense. The elves were encountering the ancient cities of Araby, some 4,500 years ago. It's a long time ago. Far older than real world equivalents. Araby is arguably one of the most ancient civilizations that we're aware of in Warhammer. It's pretty much been settled without necessarily having the cities' names almost since post-cataclysm as they moved north and then moved along the coast. By the time just 10, 15 generations had passed, this place is already populated by many types of human.
Now, this is where, if you wanted to keep Mullah Akland, who has a goofy-ass name, but if you wanted to keep him, he has an important role to play in this early era, because the story about him is that, so there's an island just north on the northern coast of Araby called Phyrus, where he is born. And he apparently turns out to be a very, very powerful sorcerer. But keep in mind that his form of sorcery is not what you would think of in the north. It means that he's someone that's very, very good at binding, bargaining, and manipulating the elementals, the various spirits of Araby. And according to his very old, but you could very easily contemporize it story, he basically decides, fuck elves. And he ends up leading a great war against the elves that had kind of settled and were hanging around the area, and he butchers them. He absolutely massacres the elves. and pushes the elves out of Araby completely, erases them from the continent, which is how, supposedly, we get the elven ruins down around the Gulf of Meads, is that it wasn't like the elves in most parts of the world where they were just basically gods compared to humanity. Here, the elves get their asses kicked, which is a very unique story.
It's a great story, in fact, and it's a story that I would very much like to see kept if they were redoing Araby. The idea of this ancient peoples pushing the elves out. It also supports the elf colonies of the old world to the north, and also the sporadic colonies that they have elsewhere. Araby was, in many respects, too dangerous to keep, and they decided no longer to keep it. And that, I think, is good.
Yeah. This Metis, whatever. This ends up leading to, generally speaking, and it sucks how vague it is, but we get the Arabian Golden Age, where Arabia becomes one of the most intellectual places of humanity. They start developing the sciences, medicine, specializing in magic. They get very good at binding spirits. Oh, that's a great. So Tohu says it would be really interesting. This is part of the Hyle's paranoia about teaching humans too much, aka like Teclis. That's a great idea. That's very, very smart.
And I think as well, it speaks to their opinion that humanity is nothing more than barbarians, because of early contact that went wrong in that particular area. I think that could work quite well. Again,
yeah,
a bit of writing.
I really like
fun.
that.
Yeah.
So their history builds up and up and up. This is likely when they would have discovered, either through meeting Grand Cathay, which is certainly possible, especially with the way the new Cathay Lord is wet. This is likely when they would have run into Grand Cathay, would have their alchemy becomes very sophisticated. They develop black powder. They start developing war machines. They start developing things like the Jezzails and all these other forms of tech. And then bad things start to happen, which is that first, Nehekara becomes very, very powerful. And Nehekara and Araby start going to war. Now, Araby doesn't just lose. They actually have a good amount of back and forth. This is, there's a rather, not super comical, but interesting note in 8th edition for the Tomb King's rewrite, which basically explains how, like, the Screaming Skull Catapult was designed to deal with Araby, because Araby was a genuine threat to Nehekara, which shows that they were a very powerful nation in and of themselves. So the King of Xandri ends up developing the Screaming Skull Catapult as a weapon of terror to basically push the Arabians back and really deal with them in a lot of ways. And there are some stories that say that Nehekara at this point gets so strong they subjugate Araby, which goes with most versions of the Nehekaran lore and makes sense. That eventually the likes of Cetra conquers Araby, and basically shows up and says, "Hey, you're under our throne now, and if you don't like it, we're going to kill your ass." And Araby goes, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, you get slightly different versions here. You get the idea that Nehek probably was involved with quite a lot of conflicts. You get the idea that Cetra later probably conquered a good chunk of it, not necessarily all of it. And you also get much later, when Al-Qadazar is doing his jobs, that he also conquers it. So there's an awful lot of let's conquer Araby at one point or another.
Araby is very likely a place the Nehekarans like show up, conquer, leave, and the Arabians go, "Oh, well, those guys are annoying," and then just immediately stop listening to them once they're gone.
And I think that there's probably going to be a good bit of to and fro going on between both Araby and Nehekara during these earlier versions of themselves. What we can say for certain is that Nehekara is not the only ancient empire of the south. And we can also say that Araby survived.
Araby will go on to survive the reign of Nagash. Some bad stuff happens. There are the Nagash trilogy does some stuff I really don't like, because it had a very confusing interpretation of that era, and like who was who. But
it really mixes the Arabians up and the Nehekarans up to a degree as well,
which
almost
causes
making them like one giant people, which I think for some of them would believe, but I don't think very strongly is supported by every other source.
And it also kind of has like Bel Aliad fully destroyed, which is weird because it's supposed to be destroyed later in a much more prominent thing, which we'll get to. But basically, Nagash shows up, bad things happen, but Araby does pretty well at keeping him over there. And eventually, Nehekara is destroyed, but Araby survives. And then...
noting one other point here as well, that if we are using those sources, that the gods of Nehekara are often sort of conflated with a lot of Arabian influence at the time as well. So it's quite likely that anyone who was reading those books and who then thought of what am I going to do with Araby might go, you know what? The gods of Nehekara could potentially be rewritten as the gods of the tribal folk of Araby, and that wouldn't necessarily go wrong. They would probably have their own names for those gods in the same way that, for example, the core gods of the old world are the same across the old world, but they use different names for those gods in different places. And we might end up finding that down in the Arabian Peninsula and over into Nehekara, the same core gods are down there with different names, and you'll probably find that top view, many of those gods would end up having cross-pollinated
which would make
from both
tons of sense
and south. It would make lots of sense, but that's one reading. There's lots of different readings that you can take from this.
From there we get the rise of Alcatazar. He sacks Lamia. Supposedly the Arabians were mercenaries that participated in that battle, and some of their like sorcerers and elementals and stuff helped destroy the city of Lamia. There's a fun story in the Neferata novel that I actually really like, where Neferata attempts to flee to Bel Aliad, and she tries to take over the city, and she fails. Because she is not the only influence there, and Abhorash is also there, and Abhorash ends up siding with the Arabians over her, and he pierces her through the heart with a lance, and she basically gets imprisoned until she escapes later. But it's this really cool story about how where the Nehekarans were not, Lamia fell to vampire influence, Bel Aliad resists it, which is fun. And then we get what is the true end of the golden era for Araby, which is the Wars of Death. Which is that, so Nagash unleashes the great ritual, Alcatazar kills him immediately afterwards, the ritual goes awry and creates the Tomb Kings. And to conflate a lot of different additions kind of coming together to try and make it into a sensible little plot point, Arkon the Black tries to take over Khemri, and ultimately fails when Cetra is awoken by the mortuary cult. Cetra comes out, kicks the shit out of Arkon, says, get the hell out of my city. Arkon leaves, and unfortunately for Araby, he goes west. And this leads to a 1,000-year war where Arkon basically tries to destroy Araby.
He's raiding in and out of the deserts where his troops aren't dying and living people obviously are, and it's just not a good time. But I think it's worth noting that if this is being rewritten, for 1,000 years of war, we have 1,000 years of resistance, which means we have 1,000 years of one old civilization becomes something new, possibly completely degrading in some places, being conquered in others, sometimes being conquered, replaced, conquered and replaced. It turns into a 1,000-year war zone and not a particularly nice place to live.
Yeah, the thing I really like about this is that Bel Aliad is actually the only city that's completely massacred and razed to the ground. Bel Aliad becomes known as the City of Dust. It's lost. And even like in the modern era, it's never really recovered.
Completely.
Whereas the rest of Araby does a relatively good job of basically using guerrilla warfare to fight Arkon. And one of my favorite notes is that this is where the desert tribes really earn their legacy, because it's the nomadic desert tribes that end up pissing Arkon off and holding him kind of at bay for a millennia.
Yeah, they very much hold the deserts, and you might think then surely the undead troops are going to be able to do this with ease. Not as easy as you might think, as it turns out. So we have ourselves a host of peoples here that are at one with the desert and can survive there and can wage war from there, which means that there is a bunch of special troops, special rules, special cool things that need to be justified to make all of this make sense. Because what we have from Araby is just big gaping holes in its history. Nothing more than often a mention that says, and these tribes, sometimes with names, sometimes with references to real world tribes, sometimes with stuff they've just made up, from themselves, and they're given weak justifications for how they do a thing, but they did do a thing. So we've got a lot of really cool desert tribe warfare going on here, plus cities that are out there that they're allying with, perhaps working with, that often do not fall for centuries at a time, and then might get sacked by Harkon at one point or another. So this is not a success for Harkon, as many might expect it to be. It's a prolonged war that ultimately the Arabians win.
Yep, Harkon the Black eventually gives up and retreats to his tower that he builds up over this time, not terribly far from the desert of Araby. And granted, Araby had a lot of really good things going for it. This is they wielded the land itself against Harkon. The spirits would not be happy with undead. Undead are a violation of many things, of the natural order of the Warhammer world, and there are things that respond to that. We also have, of course, that Araby is a very powerful naval nation. By this point, much later in their timeline than we talked about earlier, because this is like thousands of years later, the High Elves are on a much better relationship with them and likely would have been allies during this time. And there's a whole story there that would be super fun to be fleshed out one day, but we don't know a lot of the details. Speaking of not knowing details,
it's just I love this era. I just would like to take a
it's one of my favorites.
Just say it's a really nice era because you've got, loosely speaking, for the history, the rise of humanity in Araby, the golden era, the great wars with Nehekhara, which go both ways, but neither side coming out on top, and then eventually Nehekhara falls, becomes the land of the undead, and they attempt to destroy the place completely and fail, as the undead are eventually pushed back after 1,000 years of war. But it's a war that completely changes the fabric of Arabian society. The Golden Age is the past, and what they are becoming is about to rise out from the sands again.
Yeah, and there is a notable tragedy of that. Araby's ascension to being one of the greatest nations of men is heavily checked by Harkon, stagnated for 1,000 years. But ultimately, after that ends, there's basically a 1,000 plus year gap where we have no idea what happens. There's nothing.
Yeah, it's weird as fuck.
From like the right around Sigmar's birth to about 1,100 years later, we have no idea what's going on.
Literally nothing. I before we did this stream, I was summing in my head what I could say in my slightly more prolonged version of the intro, because I was going to do a little run through history and just a quick skip, and I was sitting there going, I can't think of a single thing that happens in any of this time. It's a little bit like the old world, where from 0 up to about 1100, about the time when the great cathedrals of Sigmar is built in Altdorf, it tends to be nothing more than sort of stuff might have happened maybe. And that's pretty much what happens here down in Araby. This ancient civilization, all we can say for certain is that its main cities are grounded in place, its main caliphates are put in place, the core political entities that we'll have later are kind of there. And not only that, they've held off the lands of the dead with ease. They've faced off against any potential sea invaders and have established themselves as a place. They are, as a group, a far older place than Tilia or Estalia to the north, and we know that they have been fighting them and not fighting them at different points in their history. But we know none of the details because it's just this big open, possibly something occurred.
Yep. All right, I'm going to get caught up on Super Chats super duper fast. Ricky Chapman, thank you much for the 7 months. In our Chaos Wolfram campaign, we spent time in Araby. We crossed blades with the elemental wizard who blew our demon horse into chunky salsa. Rip Lockjaw. That's great.
Lockjaw.
That's hilarious. Charles C.K., would Araby get the same sailing pass Yin got? Very possibly. That Araby...
So Araby does do a deal with the elves eventually. So not in the Golden Age, although it might have been, but we definitely know that they do a deal with the elves, and the deal that they have is they're not allowed to sail any further west than Ulthuan. This is a different deal to the one that they make with the old world to the north, where they're not allowed to sail out with the site of the coast. So Araby is considered to be a greater, let's say, diplomatic partner than the old world to the north. Araby is seen to be a stronger force. And that's something that I think could really be grounded into a new write-up, where Araby is a consistent, multiple thousand-year-old power base, and that they can deal with the elves one-on-one, claiming that we're allowed to do what we want in this half of the ocean. You can't stop us. And the elves go, yeah, fair enough. And that deal has been mentioned in multiple places, and as recently as just in Warhammer lore about 15, 20 years ago, which sounds like a long time ago, but in the terms of writing up Warhammer lore, that's actually very recent.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. Araby, is actually about to reach their like almost pinnacle as like a terrifying naval power. Even though we're past the golden age, they're about to become a really strong naval empire, but we're not quite there yet. Nathan, I always enjoyed Warhammer's awful names, whether it's puns or real world places. How do you feel? Do you have any favorites or unfavorites? So it depends. I love them when they're more minor things. Like I find it fine when it's like a character that's like in a little timeline mention for there to be like a goofy pun or like a little mention. I personally don't like when it's a very important character to the core of the setting. Like Lord Croak, not a fan of that. I really wish his name was not Lord Croak. I wish it was like, maybe that was like a shortening of his name, but his actual name is like way longer.
Something that makes more sense. I'm broadly the same. I do have a lot that I love, though. I mean, I love it when it's something that you don't notice, and then you find out about it and go, oh. There's various ones in Warhammer Punland, like the family Once Upon a Team, which is this.
That's the one I was about to say. I love
one that popped up over in our Discord relatively recently that people didn't realize was a pun, is the thumbtacks. The thumbtacks being a tax in Altdorf imposed by Karl Franz for everybody's thumbs. But that's just thumbtack, as in those pins that you put into a board. And it's a pun on thumbtack. Okay, the thumbtacks. And little puns like that, I think, are great fun. They add to the setting rather than distract or make it worse, because Warhammer's always had this goofy edge, which is super fun. But when we take, for example, all of the original names for the Lizardmen characters, all of them, whether it's Teeny Weeny, Itsy Bitsy, or whatever else you want to call them, the original names kind of sucked. Nigel Stillman, I'm calling you out. I didn't like those names. But I do love it when it's things that you can't necessarily spot, and then you spot it later.
Yeah, like I'll say that I will be eternally thankful to whatever writer, when they were writing the Lustria book, was like, oh, you know what? Teeny Weenie's kind of stupid. Let's call him Tehenwin. That way it sounds like an actual name. Unfortunately, he was kind of the only character they did that for, but at least we got that one.
And I like Tehenwin.
Yeah, but like a good example, like the fact that all of the Transformer Dinobots are mounts in the Lizardman faction, that's cool. That's fun.
Me, Grimlock.
Like, yeah, Grimlock, Zlak, Zwup, like cool, that's fine. But like, did it need to be Lord Croak and Tic-Tac-Toe? You know? All right. Hammond, if there's less magic, how did Nagash do his thing? He built the Black Pyramid.
Yeah. It was tough.
Yeah, that's why he built the Black Pyramid. Which is great, because that makes more sense. And also he started bringing more magic into that part of the world, which would have had consequences.
And he would almost certainly, over in that part of the world, tearing down the old stones that were in place from the elves previously. So all of the old networks of magic to drag magic out of the world will have been taken down, or will have been stagnated and broken to try and cause magic to stagnate locally, so they've got more dar to do all of their dark magic spells. So there's lots of ways that you can bring magic into the area that would have been useful for what he was doing.
Mr. K, Greybeard's Prospectors, Total War 3 potential story with Araby. Love those Dawies. Please make it no sense that Bretonnians on Crusade want them dead. It makes no sense Bretonnians on Crusade would want them dead. The dwarf faction? So the Greybeard's Prospectors, super fun. The idea that there's just a group of dwarves that have been like hired out to basically mine in the Adeline and Vulture Mountains. Cool. Awesome. Makes sense. Good. Honestly, remember that the Bretonnian Crusades that you see in Total War 3 are a callback to the Crusades, not active groups. Though we will talk about like the Knights of Origo are actually really fun because they're from Ackland's story. Because Ackland, his island that he was born on was like a sacred place. But then some Bretonnians showed up and said, fuck the natives. This is our sacred place now. And they built a monastery. And then the Arabians went, fuck these invaders, and ended up going in there and kicking them out, which is just fun. And Total War actually keeps that because you have the Knights of Origo as a faction, which is great. Donoman, I find it cool that Araby uses spirits instead of conventional magic because of the weakness of the Winds of Magic. I basically have the same logic for my West African-inspired fan faction based in the Planet Tuskers. Awesome.
Great. Yeah, good.
Aijion Loman, I imagine the elements in Araby being some of the very first elementals who just want to rest, and when unleashed in battle by the Arabians, become storm-like furious for being awoken or summoned. I mean, elementals in general are pretty pissy, to be honest. Most of them are kind of terrifying. Like, even when you're like, even if it's a quote-unquote young spirit, they are usually horrifying entities.
Yeah. Especially when they're moving into war aspects or some equivalent. They're just... And when they have something that gives them a proper bee in their bonnet, just take a look, for example, at the various spirits over in Athel-Loren, they tend to go really bad and often corrupt for one reason or another. And I see no reason that we wouldn't have similar, not the same stories, but similar stories down in the great deserts of Araby, where the spirits are looking at the horror that has been unleashed upon the land by Nagash and the great undeath that has basically killed everything and is just wrong. And the enraged nature of those spirits and the tribes that work with them to hold back that terror from the living desert. Quite a different view upon how many people view the desert, where they see it as this great dead open space. But to them, it isn't. It's living, it's alive, it's coursing with different types of magic. And it's the lands of the dead that are wrong. If anything, the non-desert place. So there's a lot of really cool stories that you could pull from that.
Yeah, there you could write a really cool story about how the desert tribes get annoyed when people think of the desert as being dead, and they're like, no, the lands of the dead are truly dead. Our desert is very much alive, and we intend to keep it that way. But yeah, plus you could also have some fun stuff about how does a human nation deal with trying to keep their spirits in a good balance versus how the elves of Athel-Loren try to do it. There's some fun world building there. Phil, I never understood why Araby is meant to be a land bereft of traditional magic. Even if you forget that other tropical places like Hexwall or Nehekar seemingly don't suffer. You think the woods coming to Southern Pole would have no issue passing over the place.
And hence why I gave the alternative reading that Araby still has much of the ancient magic draining artifacts that were put in place by both the old ones and then later the elves who repurposed that network. So I would suggest it's probably more that. So that means we can justify what's happening elsewhere in the world in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I vaguely recall there being an author that tried to say something along the lines of like, because of the way the desert is with like that during the day, the winds of magic end up going very, very high, and it's mostly like light magic. It's ish. And it's so high up that like a lot of the wizards down on the ground weren't able to properly use and access it. So they had to find different means, which is also a fun way you can play around with it. But I also really like the Elven Waystone system that Andy proposed.
It's an easier option than just simply saying that the world is
conspires against Araby.
Conspires against Araby. And it's just Araby that suffers this. Because we know other parts of the world absolutely do not suffer from this. Because the writers who wrote those parts didn't consider it to be an impediment that would be in place there.
Did Nehekar conquer Araby at some stage? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it did. Multiple times, and Araby kicked them out multiple times. So it was a back and forth. JF, hello, gentlemen. I've never played a roleplay game before. I just wanted to make a small little story with just my wife to use my Lizardman models, but I just paint. What can you teach of the general rules? So I would recommend picking up 4th edition roleplay if you're wanting to do with Lizardman stuff. Get the starter set and just have fun with the starter set. If you're like, I really want to use Lizardman stuff, you can pick up the Lustria book, which will give you a lot of stuff to work with as well. That's going to be your best go-to.
Yeah, I think so.
Skylar, method of execution among nomads. They secure you to a rock or pole, so you're stuck and tell you sandstorm is coming here. Enjoy. Yeah,
I can see that.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't even tie you up. They'd probably just leave you there and be like, good luck. Because, like, what are you going to do? You don't know where the hidden oases are. Hammond, what's the best way to train 1,000 men? Gorilla, get out of my chat. Diamond. Judging by maps, there seems to be a corridor of less arid land from the north to the Gulf of Medes, whatever y'all want to call it, with Nehekar to the east and the Arabian desert to the west. but Aliot seems to have controlled that. So it seems that Archon's invasion cut off the area around the Gulf from the core of Araby. If it was detailed, I'd really want to know, 1, how El Caliban survived, and 2, how El Caliban's surrounding lands differ from the Arabian core to the northwest.
Agreed.
Yep.
I mean, basically, yes.
Yeah, especially because it's like Sunberg is also down there, which is like an imperial penal colony. That's also like it's a whole. So that's also there. Like there would be a much more core
and
relationship.
You got the Bretonian one as well. It's down there too. That was added in Warhammer 5.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Warhammer 5th.
Pormisha, side topic question: what do you think of the upcoming Warhammer event? Araby is one of the candidates to be announced. I really doubt it. It could be, but I would be much more suspicious that they're going to do Kislev, because we know they've worked on Kislev for like Total War and stuff. I would expect Kislev before I'd expect Araby.
Yeah, you tend to find Games Workshop get a lot of rumors running around online, and whenever they say an announcement's coming, everyone gets super excited and get way beyond any realistic outcome as to what they expect might occur. And almost every single time, what they announce leaves people feeling a touch deflated because they expected something bigger. I think just dialing it back and going, it'll probably be Kislev, because that makes sense, is the most likely outcome.
Just be like us. Expect nothing, and then you're pleasantly surprised when it's something.
Yeah, every time there's something, you're like, yes, I got something cool. But I think it's most likely to be the thing they've already developed.
Yep. Singemeister, how well does the Arabian expulsion of the elves line up to Malekith Sundering, various Elven Civil Wars, Ashur isolationist shifts, etc.? So it's a very broad, like we're working with like a 2,000, 3,000 year ballpark. So there's a lot that happens. It could be around the time of the Sundering. Easily. Because the Sundering happened a really fucking long time ago.
And it would be very easy to wrap up the events together if you wish to do so, and tie it up with the High Elven withdrawal from the rest of their basically world-spanning empire. So yeah, that would be super easy.
Rumble foreskin. No question, but I'd like to just thank my 2 hetero nerd dads. Bold of you to assume we're simply hetero. How do you know? How do you know anything? For the endless hours of Lorebeards makes my days far more interesting. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Delighted to hear that, Rumble foreskin. Get it seen.
I'm not going to confirm or deny shit. Gentleman 95. So the War of Death. Desert tribes fighting against Harkonnen. I mean Archon.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually very funny. Yeah. All right, so we are now in the post Sigmar has been born era. Mm-hmm. Things start to get really exciting again about 1100-ish years past Sigmar, where we get Ibn Jalama, who we talked about earlier, tried to find an overland route through the desert to basically open up a spice trade from the rainforests of Lustria and the inner parts of Kasabar, which supposedly Kasabar was originally a Hakaran city and then it completely fell and was recolonized by Arabians. But then you also have like later Hakaran stuff seems to say it's a Tomb King city that has actual Tomb Kings in it. So whether or not Kasabar is Arabian or Nehakaran, I don't know.
I mean, the name sounds particularly Arabian. It's worth noting in comparison to the pair.
Yeah, so your guess is as good as mine. I want to say in the old world, I think it's currently referred to as a Tomb King city, but I'm not sure.
And it was originally an Arabian one. And if you go back to how it was first picked out, for example, on the map in Warhammer 200, White Dwarf 200, it was an Arabian city then. But yeah, you're right. It changes according to the places, but it was 100% Arabian.
Yeah, because the authors do be forget. Actually, here I can click on it.
It uses exactly the same icon as the Lashake city icon.
Yeah, interestingly, the old world does not confirm it either way. It literally says that Kasabar is said to have been the oldest city in Nehekara, but it doesn't. I mean, it has a Tomb King symbol, which seems to indicate it as a Tomb King city, but it's anybody's guess.
Its roots have been forgotten and it's become something new.
Yeah. But anyway, so we have his whole story. He encounters the Lizardmen of the Southlands. Cool, fun. And he doesn't end up successfully establishing a trade route, but he does end up becoming fabulously wealthy. Then we get a much, much more interesting little note, which is known. So this was a Demons of Chaos book timeline reference, which is the Legacy of Damnation, where there is so keep in mind, we're post-Nagash, right? Magic has fundamentally changed in this part of the world, but the Arabians didn't really get to take advantage of it because Archon just swoops in and causes a problem for a while. So in the years that Araby is rebuilding itself, we get the rise of a very powerful sorcerer who's said to be completely mad, and his name's Mahik al-Rak. And he creates a very, very powerful artifact called the Portal of Twilight, using a bunch of complicated enchanted mirrors. And by doing so, he, to put it very simply, fucks up. And he ends up being possessed by a Lord of Change. And it basically says that he goes on to influence the magic, or at least corrupted is probably actually a possession is really not probably what it should be. It should probably be more like he's corrupted. But in any event, he goes on to heavily influence the magical nature of Araby, like how people learn magic. So he basically like writes a bunch of treatises and tomes and arcane journals. And he also travels around teaching people about this new powerful form of sorcery he learned about. And he introduces a corruptive element to Araby, which is Tzeentch's influence. But it's not on the nation of Araby, it's on the magical learning in Araby, which is fascinating to me because it also kind of implies that Arabian sorcery had kind of been heavily resisting the taint of chaos for thousands of years very successfully. Which is cool.
Yeah, it is cool.
But
it's
this is where
interesting line.
Yeah, but this is where Tzeentch gets introduced to the story. You will see Tzeentch pop up more as we talk. From here, we get to Araby becomes a big naval power, which is that Sartosa falls to the Arabians.
Yeah, so it's worth noting that Araby to this point has risen to the point where it's no longer looking at inwards, it's now looking outwards. And it's looking to take territory beyond the territory that it already has. And at this point, we assume that it's taken and confirms most of its territory to be a large chunk of what is modern-day Araby. But that modern-day Araby, lots of it is going to be almost impossible to actually hold in any realistic fashion because it's just desert lands and various tribes that are making their way through there and the warfare that exists between the lands of the dead and the tribes that sit in that side. Now, if we go with the original version, Araby goes all the way right down to the Gulf of Medes, around that area, and goes in underneath the south of the lands of the dead. But that clearly has been pulled back in later versions because they didn't care about Araby at all. Araby was now a secondary location, and the core location that they wanted to focus on was the Tomb Kings in that area. So what used to be Arabian cities gets taken over by Tomb Kings, giving Tomb King story instead, because that's what's important to them. And Araby, if anything, gets pushed back in terms of its borders. Regardless of which ones we go with, historically, we can always have them in different places anyway, which means that those cities could have been Arabian for a while and then become lands of the dead later, or whatever you wish. But the Corsairs, the great ships that are plying the seas with the Arabian merchant fleet, are going out and they are becoming particularly piratical. And if we look over towards the great island of pirates, which, as I recall, at this point, is mostly taken over by Norskins in the similar fashion
it's a Norskin.
to how real-world Vikings went all the way into the Mediterranean Sea and took over Sicily. So it's very similarly posed in terms of the historical connections to the Warhammer version. They take over Sartosa, and they use Sartosa as a base of control to start dominating the trade routes in the south of the Old World.
Yeah, so the Sartosan Corsair pirates of Araby become a old world renowned, feared group. They are terrifying, and a lot of people try to go after them. A lot of the various nations of the old world attempt to unseat them and just get their asses handed to them by the Arabian Corsairs. And they develop very much a culture of their own. Arabian Corsairs from this point forward are a culture. If you want to make Araby super broad from a very zoomed out perspective, you kind of have three dominant cultures, which are the Corsairs, kind of the mainlanders around the coast, which is kind of like core Araby, and then the nomadic desert tribes out in the Sahara Desert. Those are like the three big cultural groups. And with the Corsairs, they have a lot of influence over two of the major cities, which I think now would probably be a good time to talk about the four great cities.
Just finish off the history. There's only really the Crusades to go after this.
Oh, that's fair. Okay, let's finish that up. So the Arabians, the Arabians stay in charge of Sartosa for roughly
300 years, 400 years, something like that.
Somewhere between 250 to 300. And then they get conquered by a big combined Talayan fleet.
And then
who
it sort
hilariously
of falls into its own control afterwards, anyway.
Yeah, who hilariously show up and go, "Y'all have a nice setup here. We are also now pirates. Y'all should come work for us." And the Arabians go, "Okay." And Sartosa becomes Sartosa we know.
And it becomes the cultural melting pot that is Sartosa, which is both a city of north and south, both Arabians and Thilians, and anyone else who happens to be a pirate gathering in one place.
Yep, and they basically they'll welcome anybody in as long as they are. You can come in. It's a ruthless land, but they'll let damn near anybody come in. Then we get the Crusades. So the Crusades for a long time have been the most important historical event to take place in Araby. In
Araby.
It actually very fun. Only the last stages actually happen in Araby.
Yeah, quite.
But basically, and it's been added to a lot by various authors in some ways that I think have made it a lot better. So we have Sultan Jafar, who I would like to publicly say someone actually managed to one-guy me and say, "Oh, Sotek, he's not named Jafar after the Disney villain. He's named after the Jafar, the sorcerer villain type character from 1001 Arabian Nights, because he came out before Disney." And I went, "Oh, that makes sense." And then I actually looked into it and I looked up all the publication dates. Nope, you lied. That's not true. He's based on the Disney villain. Because he came out suspiciously right after Aladdin's Disney.
Fabulous.
So Sultan Jafar is a interesting character that unfortunately doesn't have a lot about him, but has had little tidbits added to him as the years have gone on. His original story is very, very basic. It's just like there's a sultan, he took over Araby, he invades Astalia and Talaya, and then eventually gets his ass kicked.
I mean, the original story is that Sultan Jafar is almost a Cetra-like figure. Not a good guy by any stretch, and he binds all of Araby under a single rule. Before that, it had multiple rulers, each of which were working out of either one of the core cities or alternatively one of the many tribes that were spread across the deserts. And they weren't really one people, but they often worked together for shared goals. And Sultan Jafar despotic Sultan Jafar binds them all together, and it's not enough for him. And much like Cetra, decided to get out there and continue his conquest elsewhere. And we all know that conquesting over into the lands of the dead is pretty much a waste of time. So he went north into the old world instead.
Yeah. Now, there has been a lot more added to bits and pieces of his story. For instance, significant developments that have been added to him is that he had some really nasty allies. For instance, one of his great advisors is Kairos Fate Weaver, the twin-headed, terrifying greater lord of change, which is kind of makes sense considering the whole Zinch corruption is sneaking its way in. And Sultan Jafar was a very powerful wizard. He was a very, very strong wizard that was said to be able to summon demons and do all sorts of horrible things. He had entire demonic legions showing up to support his armies. He also had the allies of the Skaven. The Skaven supposedly were a major factor of convincing him to cross the Gulf, the Black Gulf, and invade Talaya and go onwards because they were supporting him. So he had some really, really strong support coming from the ether and below ground, and ultimately bound Araby together. Now, the big thing that has been
I'm just going to interrupt here and say,
sure,
fuck that noise for that background. I hate the fact that they went, the Crusaders are good guys, Sultan Jafar is an evil demon worshipper. It's bullshit. It's a classic piece of English writing over other people's culture and saying they are nothing more than demon worshipping bad guys. I've never liked that as a writing. It weakens Araby as a place, and I have no issue with chaos corruption being on both sides, but just saying that Araby was nothing more than a chaos corrupted place, and it went north and kicked in the good old world, and we then properly handed their, I mean, Bretonia and the Empire handed them their asses back in the Crusades. Yeah, we're the good guys. They're the bad guys. Bullshit. I think this is a very poorly written section that is based on cultural insensitivity and a pile of very poorly considered decisions. Now, that doesn't mean that all of that lore can't be saved and written well. It can be. There's lots of different ways it can be done. Nehekara, for example, doesn't make these mistakes. It does things very differently while simultaneously allows us to have people like Cetra who are in no way, shape, or form bad guys. But I definitely think that there is something here. It's not about simply, oh, this is an offensive use of Araby, because, well, bluntly, it sort of is. But it's not just that. It's just turning them into bad guys just so that they can justify bloodshed and mayhem and say that the army that, you know, sort of represents them as writers or good guys. It's just bad writing.
Yeah, I would very much prefer if they changed it to, instead of it being that Sultan Jafar is able to take on the old world because he gets the power of demons and Skaven, that they focus more on that's how Jafar breaks Araby, is that he's using these horrible things against his own, what should be his own people. Because the Arabians, especially in the more modern write-ups that talk about the Great Crusades, they hated Jafar. That he was a monster that was rampaging around Araby and was exploiting their very... that the Arabians have a very strict honor system. They have, in the write-ups that talk about this, which is mostly from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition, that the Arabians have a very strict honor code about various pacts between families and bloodlines and settlements about supporting one another and being there for each other when various threats come up. And it basically introduces the idea that Jafar exploits a system that was never meant to be abused like this to try and force all of these different tribes under his heel by taking advantage of what was a source of pride and honor for their people and wielding it against them and basically killing anyone that tried to stand up against him and unleashing sorcery, the likes of which they had never seen, because
I would just prefer there was no good guys.
Oh, that too. Well, I think
on both sides.
Yeah,
it would be nice if there was nice, complicated stories and betrayals and horror and chaos is playing all sides like a fiddle, like they always do. That is all that's really required. There's nothing wrong with Sultan Jafar being a really bad guy, but equally there is a lot wrong with characterizing all Arabians as chaos worshipping bad guys that need to be destroyed by the people of the old world that represent the writers.
Yeah, the big thing for me, and this could just be my reading of the story, but Sultan Jafar's death, Sultan Jafar is not killed by the Crusaders. He's killed by the Arabians. The Arabians are the ones that managed to kill him. Because the Crusaders are never, like, they bring him to battle, but there's no big notes about like some great knight or the king or whatever finally managing to get up to him. What's said is that when the war starts turning against Jafar and he starts retreating and unleashing more and more horrible things to cover his tracks, the Arabians finally realize that he's vulnerable and they turn on him. And they're the ones that end up killing him.
Arguably.
I
think that's your reading of it.
Well, no, it does. To be fair, it does say the Arabians joined the fight against Jafar. That many of them, that some did.
Yeah. But broadly, the Arabians are in support of him, regardless of what individual tales may say.
I would hope that in the rewrite,
generals of Araby were sort of in support of him. It'd be really nice if it just had a bit more of a balanced write-up.
Yeah, it would be my hope that if we ever got a detailed write-up, which hopefully the old world will do, that he's ultimately killed by heroes among the Arabian people. But anyway, so but he, like Andy said, huge impact on the world. To be fair to Jafar, he is very good. He literally takes over the vast majority of Talea and Astalia.
Yeah,
like,
he takes almost all of Talea, almost all of Astalia, threatens Britonia, which is enough to cause the Crusades to go back. And this is not a short war. This is not something that happens over the course of 5 or 6 years. This is something that takes decades to resolve. And in fact, over a century or so of continued warfare and counter-conflict between both Araby and the old world as a whole. The entire era is a good 150 years or so off the top of my head. It's a long period of time that lasts for over a century and a half worth of bloodshed, under which the Arabians control much of the south of the old world, and then later the old world attacks into Araby, attempts to hold it, and simply can't. It's too vast, it's too big, and there's too many people who are well trained, know how to fight, and kick them out. But it is worth noting from this point onwards, we appear to have a very clean description of almost every version of modern-day Araby, saying there is one sultan over all the other caliphates, the sheikhs, et al. So what is put in place by Jafar sticks. And I think that that's something that we can't forget if we're doing a rewrite of this, regardless of what they may or may not have thought of Jafar. The impact that he has is that we have an Araby that rises back to what it was back in the past. The idea of this great area that is controlled by a single great sultan who effectively controls all of the Arabians down in Araby. And that completely changes Araby as a whole. In many respects, you could argue that the great civilization of the old world over in that part of the world is Araby. It's older than the Empire. It's got a longer history than the Empire. It's basically a great civilization that Warhammer has simply forgotten.
Yeah. And from there, not a lot, really.
That's kind of the comes.
End. Yeah, the future happens. There's a cute mention in Gotrek and Felix Giant Slayer where Teclis, which actually ties kind of fun back to what we were talking about earlier with like how the elves feel about humans and why Teclis may have taught the Empire different due to Araby's influence. Teclis mentions that there is a rising cult in Araby that he's worried about, and there's this guy called the Prophet of Law, not this law, but a law, the Prophet of Law, who apparently is very speciesist and is out there declaring that all non-humans should be pushed out of Araby, which kind of is an interesting callback, of course, to Akland. Yeah, good old callback to Akland as well. And that's basically the history of Araby.
Yeah. If I was to sum it all up, it would be that once Araby was one of the great ancient civilizations. It was right next door to another one of those great ancient civilizations, Nehekhara, and Araby to begin with was just a bunch of warring individual tribes, some of which civilized into cities. Those cities rose, and slowly but surely over time, they consolidated into one people that kind of went to war with their neighbors over to the east. That went on for a while until eventually they got kicked in by their neighbors to the east, and their civilization went into a darker age. Out of that dark age, they were bound together again eventually by Sultan Jafar, who took these warring different groups and bound them underneath one banner. That banner goes on to try and take out the old world, and does a good job of it, taking out almost half of it. Eventually, though, they are pushed back and driven back into their original borders, because we all know that Warhammer loves to keep its borders. And that gives us our modern-day Araby, where we have a Grand Sultan over the entirety of what is seen as the Arabian Peninsula that kicks out. This great southern group of trading cities that are all bound underneath one sultanate. And it's fair to say that when we talk about wealth, that the greatest wealth in the old world and Araby is concentrated in Araby. It's not in the north. All of their great cities, as we're about to discuss, are broadly speaking richer than everywhere else, including probably Marienburg. And that's something that is unexpected to many of those who just adore the city of Marienburg to the north.
Yep. Okay, we're gonna cut up on Super Chats real quick, and then we'll go to some other stuff. Oh, the last history thing. The Golden Magus happens. Cool. He's a mysterious, really powerful sorcerer that comes out of one of the cities. He introduces funny enough, he actually introduces like a new religious type system with the royal jinn, which are kind of played around as potential godlike figures for Araby that I personally love, being the Sea Monarch, the Sultan of Flames, and oh god, I can't remember the last one. But it's the Sultan of Flames is the Ifrit, the Tempest. I can't remember what the Jinn is called. There's a Jinn one as well.
Off the top of my head.
But it'll come to me later. But anyway, so from there you have he shows up. He takes over the Galleon's graveyard. Actually, he's the main survivor, and he takes it over after the death of Count Noctilus, and it's revealed that he's a Tzeentch sorcerer, and then we never see him again.
Yeah, indeed. And that's something I quite like. I mean, I'm not against Jafar, for example, effectively falling to Tzeentch, but I am against ways it has been effectively used.
So from there,
super chat our way through, and
yes,
then just through the cities.
That is what we're doing now.
Good luck finding where the super chats are.
Here, I think. Yeah. How was the? Oh no, I already did that one. I already did that one too. Oh god, where was I? Here we go. The Dune memes must flow. Yes,
yes, they must.
Someone missed the husbando tier list. Oh, to someone earlier that's like Sotek so hetero. I mean, and the waifu tier list. Listen, it was a fun stream. Don't worry about it. Watchdog. Also, we'll punch up Corhill line main versus Shia Vest. Who'd win? Corhill's notably more of a warrior killer figure. Ishia's more of like a commander figure, so probably Corhill.
Yeah. In a fight.
Donovan, I feel that saying Arabian magic resists the taint of chaos to this event is a positive way of interpreting that line. I feel the actual intent when it was written may have been to imply that due to corruption, it is essentially become especially easy to corrupted. Hopefully your version is better. I mean, technically all magic is corruptive, if you want to be blunt. But
I don't mind aspects of the story, and I think it could be incorporated in a clever way. I think that it's currently in danger of being incorporated badly, though.
Yeah. Dynaman, okay, headcanon that GW will never use. What if Kasabar was an Arabian city, but due to its proximity to Nehekara, gets caught by Nagash's spells? So it is a city of the dead, but it's an Arabian city of the dead with Nehekara influence, not a true Nehekara city of the dead.
Fun.
I mean, that'd be fun. Yeah, it'd be different.
Sure.
Yep. Best of both worlds. Phil, wow, remember when we made the whole of Cathay worship Tzeentch in disguise? How problematic. Let's do it all over again. GW, yeah, sure. Let's have Tzeentch teach Araby magic. That will come back to bite us.
That.
Yeah, that's exactly what. Speaking of the Sultan, I think it possibly more than anywhere else, the terms for nobility/rulers in Araby are especially confusing. Emirs and sultans and maliks, though that term isn't used as often, are secular rulers, but the fact they have wizard caliphs, I wonder what role they actually have in Araby. Are they a rough equivalent to an arc lector? So, okay, I actually see this brought up a lot. GW did not give a shit when they applied names to Araby. They just took Middle Eastern sounding titles and just threw it at the wall.
I'd love to say that wasn't true, but it kind of is.
Yeah, because I mean, to be very blunt, this is something you'll see with
this is a classic example of needing people who understand the culture to read over everything that has been written, so they can say, "Dude, you're doing it wrong. That's not what these titles mean. That's not what these things are." You wouldn't call, for example, the leader of the old world the Pope, because that's a religious title, dude. There's lots of discussions here as to how the words have been used incorrectly, and I think that it just simply needs to be rewritten cleanly.
Yeah, and you'll see this a lot with if you go on any Warhammer forum or talk to a group of Warhammer fans, and you have somebody that's fairly well educated on the various cultures used to influence Kislev, and you go, "Oh yeah, I love the Druzina in Total War." They'll go, "The what?" And you go, "The Druzina," and they will explain to you why that term is not appropriate for what it's being used for. Or if you're talking about Norska, there are terms for some of the Norscan characters and shamans and stuff that if you say that around someone that's Icelandic or knows those languages, they'll go, "That's not what that means." That happens a lot in Warhammer. It happens a lot. Phil, you could mention the paradoxical side effect of the Crusades is a lot of cultural exchange and communication between two great civilizations changing them both. Is what it should be.
Agreed completely, and it's something that's I think just missed because that's also real world truth. And it would be really nice to see more of that incorporated.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of concepts in our world of like chivalry and romanticism came from the Crusades coming back to Europe.
Yeah, and the influence of the ancient philosophers upon the learning of Europe later as it came back is extraordinary and is one of the steps it took towards the European Enlightenment. There's a lot of cross-cultural pollination of ideas that has been sort of lost by the different historians who wish their version of history to be true. And I think that the Warhammer world could definitely benefit from a more modern view on how these things work.
Yeah. Actually, I want to tackle this one real quick. In Araby, in the era of Karl Franz, so 2512-ish, is it a united nation like the Empire, a collection of different sultanates? It depends on who you ask.
It's both, really.
Yeah, it's both. Because, like, if you look at, like...
I mean, the Empire isn't united either, so...
Yeah, that's very true. Is the Empire united? Depending on who you ask.
It's like the Empire. It's like the Empire in that it's a bunch of separate groups, and they have a Grand Sultanate over it all.
Yeah. Donovan, I have an idea for how to rewrite Jafar. What if he's not the Sultan of all Araby, but just one of many who is a cultist and leads an Araby/chaos invasion of Astalia, which in turn makes many ignorant old worlds possibly also convinced by Tzeentch cult to use an excuse to counter-invade Araby, because clearly they're all chaos worshippers. So the whole big thing is a Tzeentch scheme that manipulates everyone in the end.
I hate everything being Tzeentch, actually. I mean, I'd rather not. I don't know what I would like. It's one of those things that feels like you just need to sit down and brainstorm something better. Because as it stands, there's lots of disparate parts which have got some really cool and often thematic uses of the individual historical influences. But some of them are just kind of icky when you look at them and how they're presented very much from a Crusader perspective. And it's just very, very wrong in how it presents parts of it.
I think the big thing would be that you would want to come up with more interesting reasons for why all of Araby gets behind this invasion beyond just Sultan Jafar is super evil and like forces everyone to go with him, making it more like
they're super good and they're
so which like the Crusaders are a lot easier to change because Warhammer's kind of done that as time has passed, where they've made the Crusaders more and more and more morally ambiguous because they're the real world Crusades were a fucking shit show. And the Warhammer one should be too, where it's mostly like, sure, there were some people that had like good motives, but the vast majority of people were just assholes who wanted to go fight and kill people and steal and do other horrible things. And there's you can see the parts, right? You can see all the things and go, okay, if I put this together in the right way, I think I could make something cool, but it would take a long sit down to kind of hash it out.
Yeah, there's more here than is currently written.
T-Ball, hold on. Going back to earlier super chat, could you rewrite Araby, but Jafar was a failed ever chosen? Yeah, you could.
You could. Yeah, you definitely could. And if you did, it would change Araby forever, though, because it would be explicitly tied to chaos, and I'm not entirely convinced that that is a good choice. And it would be tied to an invasion from the north at the same time. It would be a bigger thing, so I don't think that that would be a good rewrite of Jafar.
Yeah, it would be a lot of work. Yeah, it'd be a lot of work.
Would have to be rewritten. Now, you couldn't. I'm not saying you couldn't do that. You absolutely could, but many would not be heading south to deal with Araby when another threat was coming from both the north and the far, far south.
Yeah, what Andy. That would be the hardest part. And unless like you'd have to be like, okay, let's approach this ever chosen. Let's change the rules of how an ever chosen works, and you'd have to explain that, which is fine. You could do it. It would take a lot of massage.
Complicated. Yeah. There's a lot of complication in doing that.
What can you tell us about? Oh boy, what can you tell us about Araby in the end times? Not a damn fucking thing, is what.
Yep, Araby happened. Probably drowned. Who knows?
Yeah, there's no mention of it. None. Like at least Talay and Astalia were like they were overrun by Skaven. Araby gets nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Yeah, it's a complete shame.
Hieronymus, happy Sunday, Lorebeards. Hello. It's my birthday. Well, happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you, Hieronymus. Happy birthday to you. Yeah.
Here's a hot take. Gelt is originally an alchemist and wizard from Araby before coming to the Empire. I hate to break it to you. I hate to break it to you. That is not that much of a hot take.
Not a hot take in the slightest. And I think that this makes sense. And I don't think that's at all in the slightest.
It's not a question of if he's is he a foreigner? Is he Arabian or is he from a particular border prince place? That's like the only argument, really.
Pretty much, yeah.
Skylar Martin, Andy, are you implying the greatest human civilization in the old world isn't fantasy Europe? And Vader is Luke's father?
Wait,
no,
what?
It's not true. It's impossible.
Yeah, it's a weird one because they've got all of the material written, making it quite clear that exactly what you state is the case, while simultaneously there are some writers who constantly forget or purposely avoid it.
Yeah, especially it's such a shame that if you sit just looking at the evidence we have, which is funny because GW forgets about it. Araby is
it's so cool.
It's potentially even older than Grand Cathay, which is awesome. Yeah. And but GW doesn't know that.
No, Grand Cathay. Yes, not Cathay.
Yeah, the actual
as an idea,
establishment date of Grand Cathay.
Definitely. And I would agree that it's almost certainly older than Grand Cathay.
Yeah. Krimgalto, Searing Doom. You rank for the Golden Magus. I don't even know Zinch. I've never heard of that bird in my life. Thank you.
Dude, your turban.
Bro, the amount of photoshopping that he does for every stream. Shin Mai Tao. Hopefully I didn't butcher that. Sorry. Hey, Loremaster, no shout out necessary. Well, I'm going to. Longtime lurker, just want to say thanks for the content. Love me some more. Well, thank you
in return for watching.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Ricky Chapman, we used Jafar's skull as magic items in our Chaos campaign. It was also revealed that Jafar had actually found out Fate Weaver's true name, who helped the Crusade weaken Jafar so he could escape. That's cool.
So I think there's something in, for example, having Jafar use Fate Weaver. He's using Chaos, and Fate Weaver wants out of this and manipulates, for example, a Crusade to free himself. Jafar is a far more...
Ooh, that's fun.
Less of a chaos creature, okay, and he's more of how Dark Elves view chaos, which is something to be used. And Jafar bound the spirit of Fate Weaver into his control, and Fate Weaver's doing everything in its power to get away from him. Now we've got a rewriting of Jafar that could potentially work and not turn it into a mustache-twirling chaos worshiper. Instead, he's using chaos to benefit himself. That would be one potential way of doing it, but definitely needs to rewrite that.
I will say that could work quite well, because the only real note in the Demon book is it just says that Jafar and Kairos have a pact, and that Kairos abandons him at the final battle, which is why he loses.
100%. If he could get out of that, he would. So I think that could be a very, at least a start of a rewrite.
Yeah, that could be so cool too, because you could have an interesting twist on the story where, if your goal is to be anti-chaos, Jafar is in some ways the good guy because he's actually binding and demons and taking a lot of them out of the equation. But then the good guys come down and free them all by killing them.
Yeah, quite. And allows Kairos Fate Weaver to be free in the Warhammer world to get up to its mischief again. And that makes for one potential route to try and build, not necessarily balance, but build a more complicated breathing tale.
Yeah, that's very cool. Hannibal, if Araby had much more stable magic, maybe that starts the Crusades, propagandizing the old world as a ticking time bomb of chaos and rogue mages. So,
Definitely.
Yeah, there's a lot of easy stuff that could be done to say that the Crusades isn't just King Louis the Righteous being like, we're good guys, let's go! Because it's weak is really the core there.
And I agree that there's definitely something there in we're doing it right, they're doing it wrong, because there's often a reason to try and to other the enemy that stands before you. And it's very easy to see that Estalia, Tilia, the old world, the empire is just a mess. a proper mess. And if they see themselves as a far more ordered civilization that can bring order to the world in a way that, for example, Mehakara completely fails at nowadays, I could definitely see something in that. It could be.
Felipe,
could
thanks
work.
so much for gifting 10 members. Holy shit, that's super generous of you. Thank you so much. That's very kind. I forget that you could do that on YouTube. That's very, very nice.
You could. There you go. I really need to set up memberships on YouTube on my channel.
You do. Yeah, you really do. Because then you could do member streams, which would be awesome.
Okay, and since you've said that, Philip, I will go out of my way to get it organized for next time, just because you've asked.
I will harass him until he does. I promise.
Yeah, he will. He's a good harasser.
Yeah, Super Arlock, having Araby as a sort of land recovering from large-scale chaos corruption would be interesting if difficult to make sensitive. There is a hint of some stuff running around in Araby about that Araby is a place that is surprisingly resistant to corruption. Yeah. Like the people and the land itself are good against undead corruption. They're good against chaos corruption. They're resilient, which could make for a beautiful foundation of a people, but it's tricky to do.
Yeah, I think that that potentially works. And I don't mean this idea, but the idea that they're resistant in general. And the idea of perhaps trying to duplicate what Jafar does leads many down to corruption because you're effectively dealing with demons. And that's going to bring corruption. I think you can have a history that allows for potential corruption and the various Tzeentch machinations popping up again and again. Machinations that Tzeentch itself finds difficult to control sometimes because it's so far away from where its magic is at its strongest, because magic there is weak.
All right, and that leaves us with just enough time to go over the 4 great cities.
Alrighty, 4 great cities barely. It is. Fortunately, there's not a huge amount written about each of them, so this shouldn't be too hard.
Yeah, they're fairly straightforward.
Yeah,
so first up, we have El Haik, also known sometimes as El Haka, also sometimes known as, I think, El Haik as well.
Yeah, Al Haka is what it got renamed in Warmaster because they looked at the original name and went, I'm not entirely sure that's a good name. Oops. So it got a rename, but do be aware that people don't realize it got renamed, so they often go back to the original one on more than one occasion.
Yeah, and this is often referred to as the City of Thieves, but ultimately it is the largest of the cities in Araby. Oh, it's largest port. Largest port?
It is not that either. It is the center of administration, though, because this is where the Grand Sultan is.
Largest commercial port. There we go.
It's an interesting. It's not even that, as we discussed to the other ones, okay? Because other things have sort of rewritten it.
I tried.
It's the Grand Sultan, however, supposedly rules from here.
Yes.
It is, however, enormous. A really big city. And other cities keep on rewriting bits of it. So Al Haik has sort of shifted over time. Al Haik was originally nothing more than almost the center of the Corsairs, where all of the pirates used to flow from, and it went down into the pirate coast of Araby from them. But it got rewritten. And then it got rewritten again, and often with just like a single line of text here or there. Loosely speaking, now it's just a great city, and it's from here that the Grand Sultan rules on the northern coast. And that's almost all we have for certain with it nowadays. There's very little to say.
Yeah, we do have a couple additional fun things, which is that, this is where Jafar was dealt one of his biggest defeats. This is like where his big final defeat went off. Another thing is that it actually got a really, really fun mention in a book that overall I liked, even though there was one section I didn't, which is the High Elf Player's Guide, which El Haik is actually expanded to have a notable elven district that has some really notable elven houses residing there. And I love this for 2 reasons. A, more High Elf Araby interaction, which is great. B, it shows the High Elves not being the goody two-shoes that a lot of people confuse them to be, because El Haik is one of the biggest trade ports for slavery in the old world. And the elves are totally
this
cool
is
with
worth just generally mentioning that the entirety of Araby has a significant slave population. It is a slaving old world. I mean, it's strictly not old world if we run by most definitions, but it's Arabian. But they, like the Dark Elves, like some of the High Elves, like the Norse and others, deal in and trade people. And slavery is a core part of their drive towards money because they are a rich nation.
Yeah, they are rich as absolute fuck. The four great cities are said to have so much goddamn wealth that they rival the dwarfs. Think about that.
No, they don't even rival the dwarves. They are richer than the dwarves. There's probably only one city in the entirety of what we see as the Great Sea surroundings that arguably is richer, and that's Lothern. Over in Ulthuan, the High Elf capital. And that's because it has a whole host of riches that they just don't trade. They got gems the size of heads all over the place as part of their decoration. This is different. This is purely trade-born wealth. And all of the four great cities of Araby are immensely rich, although one is richer than the other. It's almost certainly all of them are richer than Marienburg as well.
Yeah. From there, we pop over to Kofur. This city actually has a surprising amount written about it because it likes to pop up in like novels and other various adventures and stuff.
Surprisingly, a large amount of information in Kofur.
Yeah, it is. So this is the city of spice. These guys make oodles of bank. Interestingly, it is not very well known for having much while slavery is allowed, it's relatively rare in the city compared to many of the others. Instead, they trade in things like spices, books, alchemy, and they have a lot of foreign quarters. They have a dwarf quarter, they have an elf quarter, they have a Talayan quarter. They actually share a really strong relationship with Talaya, which is likely why they're not as pro-slavery, because they have so many other factions and old worlders that reside there that they try and make they're very ambassadorial facing. But they trade in goods, and boy, howdy do they have goods. They even have like a street of booksellers, and just some really, really fun things. Supposedly they have enough influence that they don't like to listen to the Grand Sultanate and say, nope, we're independent, we have our own sultan, fuck you. Which is very humans doing politics, human stuff.
Totally. Kofur is interesting for a few reasons. One, it doesn't actually sound like it's spelt correctly. It sounds like it should be something else, and interestingly has come up. And it's really interesting. You should bring up this spelling, Kafir, Great Book of Judges, because I had a friend of mine who was from Egypt, who had basically rewritten all of Araby, and that's exactly the same spelling that he went with Kofur. He went with Kafir. So perhaps that's a good one.
That sounds much more Arabian, much less old world, which is good.
Yeah, exactly. And I like to think that the spellings we have just now are very much the old world spellings, and that a new book would update everything completely. But loosely speaking, Kofur is the old center of trade. And by that I mean, in previous editions, all the way up to like 5th, 6th edition Warhammer, Kofur was the primary trade port. This was the place where all of core trade in Araby was centered. Now, obviously, all the other cities have got their own trade going on too, but this is the one, for example, that the High Elves had on one of their core trading routes. It's marked out in a couple of the books. It's marked out in Dogs of War, for example, that Kofur is where it's centered into. And Kofur was, because of this, the richest city that existed of them all, but we're about to contradict that in a moment. So Kofur, at least in the earlier versions, was thus the city of spices. It's the city of all the riches that you get from across the world. They never justify it properly. They never explain how they're at the end of some sort of spice road that's coming all the way from the east. It just isn't explained at all, because the version of Araby in Warhammer is so very different to real world Arabian cities, and it's not on the spice route, but it is here. So we have got ourselves a city that is the primary trade center, arguably, in the great continents that is the old world. This is the one of all of them that stands above Marienburg. But as to other details, there's a little bit here, there's a little bit there.
One fun thing that does show once again that Arabian resilience against corruption is that in the Tome of Salvation, there's actually a fun little story about Kofar, which is that there was a gentleman there, the Grand Vizier scandal, which Grand Vizier Bar was a nasty guy. That dude was not above using anything, including chaos stuff and necromancy, and he gets discovered by the Arabians. And what do? Despite his grand success, they try to kill him, and he has to flee Araby. And hilariously, where does this horrible, twisted, mad, evil man who's likes consorting with Skaven, chaos, corruption, necromancy go to for refuge? Middenheim. Because the Empire's like, come on in.
Yeah.
Which I actually love that. I love that. That's great.
Grand Vizier Bar. Let's move away from the salad bar.
That's the salad bar. That's hilarious.
There's lots of references, but loosely speaking, Kofar is the primary trading port. Enormous dwarf sections, enormous Tillian quarters, enormous elf quarters. This is the true melting pot of all Araby.
Yep. From there, we head just a little bit south, further down into the Bay of Corsairs, where we go to the city of Corsairs, Lashik.
Lashik.
Lashik got a lot of its detailing thanks to Al-Mukhtar and his desert dogs, is where it featured very heavily, prominently, because that's the city that Al-Mukhtar ends up going to when he comes to Araby. But this city is very, very notable slave port within the Warhammer world. And it has just kind of like a various amount of fun mentions throughout various aspects of Warhammer history. There's apparently a whole thing about how the Sultan there, due to shenanigans, this is from the Neferata book, so take it with a grain of salt, but it's a fun story. That the Sultan there, in a way of trying to defend himself, established a history of having a harem guard. So his bodyguard is all-female regiment. And supposedly that has stuck in Lashik's history to the modern day, where all the sultans have pure female bodyguards, which is genuinely quite interesting.
Yeah, I'm cool with that. This is of them all. This is the one that I've always felt has had the least direct flavor, other than being described as the Corsair city. So clearly this is where the primary ports are for their many war fleets and their trading fleets. But beyond that, we don't have a lot. Some characters drop off by here and it's just an Arabian city. Some people come from here and it's just an Arabian city. But this is the least detailed of them all in terms of an overall character. Beyond, this is right beside the Bay of Corsairs, and it's presumably, given that it is the city of Corsairs, where most of the war fleets of Araby birth. But is it?
Yeah,
it's not directly said that it is, but we can presume it is.
Yeah, it is quite vague.
It really is.
Yeah, it says like, oh, they get a lot of money because the Corsairs supposedly bring a lot of their, booty and war plunder and stuff there. That's it's if you were to be enslaved by the Corsairs in like a role play storyline you're doing, or you got caught by the Corsairs, this is likely where you would end up.
Finally, Martek, I think.
Yes, Martek is the last of the great cities, the city of unimaginable luxury.
Yeah, this place is the richest. There we go. It's an independent, as much as any of Araby is independent kingdom up in the mountains. And its nobles are said to be the richest that there is anywhere ever. And that's pretty much it. They own countless slaves, surrounded by enormous bounteous wealth. And what other details do we have for the place other than it's up in the mountains? Great palaces, gorgeous palaces.
They have a famous dungeon. They do have a famous
but
dungeon.
that's only because Martex comes as a name from Dungeons and Dragons, and it's just a reference to that.
Yeah, which is
it's got big extensive dungeons.
Yeah, which is quite funny.
Oh man.
Yeah. It's like it's super duper wealthy, opulent, ridiculous. It's a little disconnected from the rest of Araby because what's interesting is how wealthy it is despite not being a port.
Yeah, there's definitely something here that should be discussed, particularly when you look at the Eye of the Panther, which is just down below there, an area that was captured by the Knights Panther, and the Knights Panther themselves being marked as being one of the richest orders back through the Crusader expansions that were given in White Dwarf at some point, and clearly tied through to what happens in Martek, where the Knights Panther are also said to currently be. But we have very little detail beyond they're enormously rich. This is a classic example of something that needs to be written and developed out further, because what we have is just a few scant details really from Warmaster and similar, which say it's a place that exists. Yeah, kind of, but without the justification of oil. We need to have why they're rich. What is it that's happening up there that makes them so exceedingly wealthy? But they are, out of all the cities that you will ever hear of over on this side of the World's Edge Mountains, this is the richest one by some significant measure. And I would love to see how that's justified.
Yeah, and I would very much agree with Andy. There's a story of there's something going on beneath those mountains.
Yep,
there is something in the Adelan Mountains that is very unusual because there's a whole storyline that is never expressed because you have to kind of make up your own answer of what the Knights Panther found there, because they found something that like is a whole foundational thing about their order. So there's a story there, but we don't know what it is.
Little else to say about Martek other than supposedly its rulers are a bit grim, but it's Warhammer. They all are. So there's little else that you can say beyond they are rich. So you can take that with whatever you wish to do with it and turn it into something for your own games if you wish.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's kind of it for the four great cities, which, to be clear, are the Arabian equivalent and should be as detailed as Altdorf, Nuln, Minheim, and Talapine. Like, they should be that level of developed.
And all of them have had books written about them at some point, but these cities down here have not. And they're all kind of bigger, and they're all much older by several orders of degree, thousands of years older. There are enormously awesome stories waiting to be told that just never have been.
Yeah. All right, we've got time for select. And you may go, oh, well, it sounds like the Lorebeards talk about everything. I just want to be clear. Keep in mind, we did not touch the roster at all.
There's a lot we haven't discussed about Araby in total. Just in terms of who they are as a people, the type of armies they field, their navies, and similar.
Yeah,
we've covered loosely. It's history.
We covered a lot.
The main cities, and we have covered quite a bit here. Yes.
Aaron, if it's pronounced Araby, wouldn't they be the Arabians, not the Arabians? That's what I said.
Very possibly.
People say I'm stupid. Sinchmeister, as units, battle automata powered by elementals. I understand the desire for this.
Nehekara.
Which might not be a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. But you definitely want it to be very unique. You'd have to somehow find a way to do it without it being the Kadai of the Chaos Dwarves and also not being the Ushabti of the Tomb Kings.
Yeah,
you'd have to somehow.
You tend to find most Warhammer armies are drawing upon things from real world equivalents and then running with it and doing something different. The idea of giant automata is not, strictly speaking, directly tied to what we imagine as we go through the various tales and stories that come from real-world Araby equivalents. So the Ushabti are a thing. The giant statues that we see, and that's all we really have left of ancient Egypt, are a thing. You can see why they went down that route there, but I would be less interested in doing that here. Really, if you want to use giant automaton type things, you're looking at somewhere like, say, Nippon with its Gundam equivalents. There definitely should be something there in terms of potential use, but I feel it's less appropriate here, but you could definitely justify it if you wish to do so.
Yeah, I would be much more impressed with Araby and interested in seeing like, oh, this is how the Ifrit, like just having them being powerful elementals of the Ifrits, the Jinn, the Genie, and the Sea Nymphs. Like that's a lot of creatures right there that would all be unique and able to be developed into their own expressions, which would be super fun. I don't think you need to worry about spicing them up beyond just creating
adding
them.
extras. Yeah, totally. Take what's already there and build it. Yeah.
Cole Patterson, realistically, Talea should have slavery. Renaissance Italy slavery wasn't huge and it was mostly domestic, but all the horrors of slavery nonetheless.
Yeah, I agree completely. Tilia, it's easy to not give Tilia slavery because it's certainly more palatable to modern viewers and tastes. But if we're looking at any sort of similarities and the grimness of the Warhammer world, I think many places will perhaps made it illegal, but nevertheless, many places will be using slaves as a core component of their business.
Yeah, I mean, especially because like they're very culturally influenced by Sartosa as well, which has a very strong slavery system.
Yeah, totally.
GW, where's my Arabian sand shifters? I'm not sure what a sand shifter would be precisely. I don't know if that's like a creature or a beast or what.
But I do think that whether it's the Tuareg bandits or whether it's one of the many nomadic tribes that are making their way around the desert, there's going to be some that are going to be using magics that are around the idea of sand. And doing stuff with it. There's some unique creatures that are doing stuff down there too. It's going to be an inevitability.
I would be genuinely staggered if GW had the restraint to not unleash Lore of the Sands on us.
Yeah, I mean, they've watched The Mummy. They can't help themselves.
Yeah, it's hard. It would be hard as someone not to watch The Mummy, watch Avatar: The Last Airbender, and go, "Ooh, sand shift, Lore of Sand's pretty cool." Just like run with it, and I'd be like, I mean, you're not wrong. It would be pretty cool. Let's see, Dynamite. Do we have any information on El Kalabad? Personally, if the big four are the Arabian equivalent to Nuln, Altdorf, Mindenheim, and Talabheim, El Kalabad, in my opinion, should be like the Marienburg.
As in the one on the outside that's perhaps no longer part of the whole. I see no reason for that not to be the case, although it does appear to be now strongly tied into Mehekara.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell's going on over there.
I'm not convinced the GW knows either.
Yeah, GW would have to hash it out, and they're pretty slow to do that. Cinchmeister, make them beautiful, ornate humanoid clockwork men. I could see that being like a special character gimmick. Like there's an alchemist who's designed a fancy like chassis or body that contains an elemental that he uses as like a soldier or a bodyguard or a mount. I could see that being a cool concept, but I feel like that would probably be like an isolated incident, not something that's being...
also want to try and not reproduce what's already sort of a core empire aesthetic. You'd be looking to create something that really felt Arabian rather than felt empire.
Yeah,
and you'd be potentially crossing over some ideas there.
Yeah, in a desert, clockwork technology would probably not be a great idea.
Yeah, get caught up with the sand.
Yeah, that would not work well.
But the main cities are deserts. So,
yeah, true. Yeah. Donovan, also for people who don't know, can you give a quick summary of Fatindira's story? Super fast. Fatindira is basically, she is a descendant of Araby, and they are one of a group of people, I want to say they were a nomadic desert tribe folk, that they went north eventually, and they ended up going up into the Border Princes. Her story was explored in the roleplay game, and it's a genuinely good but heartbreaking story about like racism essentially in the Warhammer world, where a bad thing happens in a border princedom area, and her family is blamed for it, even though it wasn't them, just because they're Arabian. So her people get massacred. She escapes, and she ends up becoming like a really powerful border princess in her own right, and she has like a really strict moral code, and she ends up getting revenge against the people that killed her people, and then she goes on to become like a very powerful border princess.
A classic example of using the border princes to be nothing more than a receptacle for people from other places. She's all right. She's detailed in Lord of the Light Lord, a book that I did quite a bit of work for.
Yeah, that book is better than it has any right to be, but is also very weird.
Agreed on both counts.
Yeah. And that we're out of time, unfortunately.
We're done. So I'm going to have a very brief summary. What is Araby? Araby is one of the oldest human civilizations in the world. Araby has stood the test of time, and some of its cities are so ancient that they make the old world look new. This is a core component of what Araby was, became, and still is. So Araby is also this giant open space, this black hole that sits beneath the old world that all of the writers are aware of. They love referencing in their various books, but Games Workshop seems utterly terrified of, in the same way that they've been terrified of many things that they've kind of messed up in the past with their write-ups that came across as accidentally racist or just accidentally problematic in other ways. And no one has yet got to grips with what they could do. Warmaster gave it a good go, and they gave it a good go. Warmaster was a pretty decent army, and what Rick created over there with, I can't remember who the co-author was with him, was a great version of what Araby could be. But that is not what Araby is today. Araby is today waiting to happen. The old world as a game pretty much should be dealing with Araby. If you were going to build a new army for Warhammer that makes sense for the old world and the game that starts in the Border Princes and spreads out, Araby is this open goal waiting to be scored with, because we have, sitting on the doorstep of their game, the most ancient of human cultures that held off against the lands of the dead, that held off against the High Elves, that went to war with the northern realms of the old world and won for a good few centuries before the Crusades eventually push it back, and then continue to go to war or to trade with them from that point onwards. It's a great location. It's ripe with potential, and it's got lots of potential unique characteristics for both magic, unique troops, and just awesome miniatures that could occur down there. At the moment, it feels like Games Workshop's almost scared of it because they don't really want to do it, because they're scared of being called out for doing it in a insensitive fashion. And I think that is bluntly cowardice and racist as well. Because effectively you're saying you don't get to have your culture reflected in Warhammer because we're scared of it. No. Hire some good writers and get it freaking done. Now, whether they will ever reach that point because of the expanding nature of what they're doing with the old world, and whether they can have a slot for Araby, that's entirely up to them. But I would really like to see it happen, because Araby is one of these great open whiteboards that's just waiting to be filled in. There's more than enough detail. We opened explaining that pretty much all of the books that Warhammer has references Araby at one point. This isn't like Grand Cathay, which gets the occasional mention in, say, the Ogre Kingdoms, or gets the occasional mention in a novel. Araby is this weird one that gets mentioned in almost every book in some fashion or another, where it's a roleplay book which takes place in a castle in the Empire, and they happen to have an Arabian sword in it, or something similar. It's this place that's just waiting, tantalizingly close to be detailed. And I personally would love to see it happen. But as it stands, what we have is, as you've noted already, 4 bland, very rich cities and a long history with very few details other than the Crusades, which obviously they're bad guys. And that's it.
And yeah, I don't think anybody hasn't noticed that GW has clearly been kind of embarrassed about the Crusades, because they're no longer calling him Sultan Jafar. He's just the Great Sultan. It doesn't have a name anymore. But yeah, please, GW, don't be cowards. Do Araby. It'll be awesome. People will love it. You'll make all the money. Trench Crusade's doing it. People are loving it.
Yeah.
And our version is a lot less potentially sticky than Trench Crusade's version.
Damn straight.
Donovan had an idea for a creature in Araby. Basically, it's a giant creature made of huge, thin tentacles with a bunch of feather-like structures that is carried through the sandstorms, filtering out sand if anything is felt by the feathers. Tentacle wrap around them, pull them towards the mouth. Terrifying. I love it. Cole Patterson, Jin should be possessed of the Zoltars. Oh my god, the fortune teller machines. I actually saw a fully functioning, like practically mint condition one in Brighton, and it was actually super cool. I'm not gonna shit on that at all. That machine, like the fortunes it gives you, are very elaborate and are these beautifully printed cards. Very, very cool machine. It's on the Brighton Pier if anyone ever wants to see one.
And just got to call out this comment. Yeah, we didn't really discuss all the troop types, but yes, they have flying carpets.
We didn't forget. We ran out of time. There's a difference.
Yeah, totally.
Phil, I'll just say the very first story of Arabian Nights takes place in the kingdom of people under the sea. So how are relations between Fishman and Araby? Great, apparently.
Nicely brought around, Phil.
Yeah. Okay, that's how you know it's Lorebeards. We got our Fishman in.
We got our Fishman reference in.
Sorry, no, Brighton, UK, not Brighton, US.
Totally.
All right, and with that, that brings us to the end of today's stream. We hope you had fun and enjoyed learning a bit about Araby. I will shamelessly plug that I do have a video that's like a proposal of how to bring Araby into Total War, where I pretty much only talk about like a lot of the units. If you want to just watch that, and you can.
In fact, I would recommend going over and watching that because we didn't really cover the units today. We just covered Araby itself. So if you want to know more about all the individual units, go check Sotek's stream where he goes in depth into all the different options that Total War could have if they were to bring Araby to the table.
Yeah. Some quick just stuff. This Wednesday, we are here at the Loremaster of Sotek channel, and we're doing another What If episode. This time we're doing What If the Hobgoblins had not betrayed the other Greenskins or had stuck with, not ended up siding with the Chaos Dwarves in the Siege of Zarnagran. So basically, what if the Greenskins had successfully taken Zarnagran? How would the world have changed? And the answers may surprise you.
Yeah.
So that one's going to be super duper fun because we've been wanting to do a Greenskin focused one for a hot minute, and this finally gives us the chance to do it.
Yeah, it totally does.
Yeah. From there, next Sunday, if Andy would like to reveal,
I've forgotten what we do next Sunday.
It's a man of the undead proclivity.
Is it?
Yeah,
I've completely forgotten what we're doing. What are we doing next Sunday?
I guess I'll say it. We're doing at long last on the LAWhammer channel.
Oh, I remember what we're doing. We're doing Manfred. Holy crap! We're finally doing Manfred von Karstein. We are doing everybody's. Yeah. I completely forgot.
He got there.
It's because I've not done the poster for it yet, and I was like, "What am I doing? I haven't done the poster. What's going on?" Manfred von Karstein, everybody's favorite vampire to hate. We are going to be giving you his much longer than many people realize history, going into the depths of who he is, why he is, and what eventually he became, and whether we think that entire story is as awesome as we think it is, because it is.
Yeah, and we're also going to talk about how the end times is bullshit and it's slander.
Yep. The end, that's kind of what I was hitting at. The story at the end for Manfred is it pretty much takes everything that was written for him and says, you know all that stuff? Yeah, screw that. We're going in a different direction. The end times was
character assassination is what it was.
It really was.
I don't think show up to stream next week and you could throw money at him for that. I'm sure he'll be happy to do it. Only last couple things. So there will be a vote here on my channel later today about what we'll be doing the Sunday following. And we will also have the next Wednesday stream ready to reveal.
I think that vote will be on my channel.
Oh, will it? Okay, it'll be on the LAWhammer channel then.
It'll be on my channel. Hey, ignore Sotek. You'll find it over on the YouTube on my channel and the messages over there because it's for your
less
channel.
Work for me. I'm fine.
Totally is. I mean, I don't want to do it, but I will be doing that later today.
Yeah. And I think that's Lorebeards or not Lorebeards, LAWhammer Friday.
Oh yes, LAWhammer Friday. Oh yeah, LAWhammer is this Friday. Okay. And yeah, things are happening. In fact, I'm going to be putting up the video for last week's one for our Patreon members tonight because we've got it online already, which is good. So I'm going to be doing that after the show. So expect that to pop up if you're a member over on our Patreon for you to watch later on this evening. But yeah, things are kicking off big time in our version, and apparently there's a big pilgrimage coming. Good times.
Ooh, very exciting. And then
Yeah.
Saturday Rookeries on this week.
It is not. We are still on our break. I don't think we're due for another 2 weeks yet. I've got to check.
Okay,
But
keep that in mind.
this weekend, I'm going to be discussing my next masterclass, which will be going next week.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Yeah.
All right, and I think that's pretty much everything.
Yeah, I think so.
There will be little announcements coming out. Sometime in the next week or two, we're going to have bonus episodes start popping up, where we'll be interviewing some different kinds of people. Well, not interviewing, but having on for chats. For some different folks, which will be a really good time. And those will not be on Wednesday or Sunday. They're going to be bonus, essentially.
Yep.
So we'll figure that out and let y'all know. And that's it.
That's it. Excellent. So until then, we will see you next time on Lorebeards on this Wednesday when we what if like hell.
Bye-bye.